have had my audio on, or I shouldn't have.
So you two are in the same room. Got it. So that tells me something's still coming out of your speakers instead of your headset. So Paul, do you both hear? Or sorry, let me say that a different way. You're hearing me in your headphones, right? You hear me in your headphones, yes?
I only hear you in my headphones.
Okay. And what are the odds that you and Mayor Murillo are going to be talking at the same time? We'll never be talking at the same time. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, cool. Then we're good.
Yeah, we'll be sure to pause and make sure we turn off our audio.
Perfect. All right, team, we are in fantastic shape. Matt, just a reminder, you are screen sharing, so there you go. You are getting ready to rock and roll there. So Mayor Murillo, one small detail that changed from last time to this one would be the time.
So whenever we get to the end of a presentation, it's time for public comment. This will come up, and okay, this is well, that's VPN, that's graphics card. This is
That's your antivirus. Speakers is fine. What's that next one? OneDrive one, which was the bottom row middle.
Today is April 14th, 2020. I'm Santa Barbara Mayor Kathy Murillo, and we're calling this meeting to order. Thank you so much to the public for adjusting to this new way of conducting a public meeting. You can go to our website, santabarbaraca.gov, to learn how to call in and make public comment during the meeting. Some of you are already tuned in through the internet. Others might be watching on City TV through Cox cable service. We're going to go ahead and do our Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Will you do a roll call, please, Ms. Clerk?
Yes, Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Snedden.
Here.
Councilmember Friedman.
here.
Councilmember Harmon.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
And Mayor Murillo.
Here. Thank you. Mr. Casey, are there any changes to our agenda today?
No, Madam Mayor.
Very good. So we'll go to public comment, and every speaker will get 3 minutes, and we're asking that you, we have a new system where we have the 3-minute timer and it goes in 30-second increments. So I'm not sure if everybody can see the screen. Maybe you need to time yourself at home. So Ms. Clerk, will you go ahead and be in charge of having people call in? Thank you.
Certainly, Madam Mayor and council members and members of the public. We do have 7 members of the public who have called in so far. There is a raise your hand functionality on the software. So we'll ask members of the public, when we get to the item you want to speak on, please raise your hand. At this point, we have 1 member of the public, Milt Hess, who has indicated that he wishes to raise his hand on this item. We also have Ms. Kimmy Van Dyke, yes, no. We'll see if she stays to it. So I am going to call your name. You will have 3 minutes. Please state your name and make your comments. And then you can hang up and I will unmute you. And if you can see the screen, you'll see that there is a timer on screen. And please mute your television or however you are watching this. Okay, Mr. Hess, please go ahead.
I just have to mute my system. Okay. Mayor Murillo and council members, good afternoon. My name is Milt Hess and I'm chair of the city's library board and I'm Santa Barbara's representative on the county's library advisory committee. And I want to thank you for your ongoing support for our public library. I'd like to just speak briefly about what a librarian does when the library has to close its doors for a few months. The pandemic closed the Zone 1 libraries on March 13th, but just as during the Thomas Fire, the Santa Barbara library staff has stepped up beyond their traditional roles to respond to the emergent need. Starting almost immediately, Director Jessica Cadiente and her professional staff created innovative programs to support the community during shelter in place. And I would just like to cite 3 examples. The first one is a program called SBPL Delivers. Each cardholder can request up to 4 books to be mailed to their home. And the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation is funding the postage. And over 1,000 bundles have been sent to cardholders in Santa Barbara, Carpinteria, and Montecito, comprising over 4,000 items. The second program is virtual story times using GoToMeeting. And the library is providing access to Baby and Me, Wiggly Sport Story Time, Preschool Story Time, and more. And then finally, for the job seekers in our community, the SBPL Works program, the library staff are offering bilingual phone and video conference appointments to support residents seeking jobs. Regrettably, the library has had to release its hourly workers. So in addition to the hardship this causes to the workers, it adds to the challenges ahead when shelter in place is lifted and we work to resume our former lives. So in conclusion, I encourage you to keep in mind the importance of libraries to our community, and especially the inspiring response of our library staff during this crisis. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next person, Ms. Clerk.
Hi, our next speaker is Kimmy Van Dyke. Ms. Van Dyke, please state your name. You have 3 minutes. Please mute your TV or however you're watching this before you speak. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Hi, I was just trying to help a friend get on because she's having some technical difficulties. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimmy Van Dyke, and I am a member of 5G Free Santa Barbara. First, I'd like to thank Council Member Kristen Sneddon for her ongoing support and for bringing our public comment topic regarding the implementation of a moratorium on the deployment of any new small cell wireless facilities during the COVID-19 quarantine from earlier on during last week's City Council meeting to be discussed further at the very end. Thank you also to Council Members Oscar Gutierrez and Eric Friedman who replied to my follow-up emails. We appreciate your time and efforts very much. For anyone who would like to hear the city attorney Ariel Colon reply, please go to the minute marker on the Tuesday, April 7th webinar at 4 hours, 40 minutes and 40 seconds. In light of Mr. Colon's response, I would request that he first read the letter that was submitted via email so he can click on the specific links provided to CISA.gov, which is Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and FEMA.gov, Federal Emergency Management Agency, to further investigate this action to implement this moratorium. It sounds like our city can slow down 4G, 5G small cell application approvals and deployment during the quarantine without passing an emergency ordinance. Instead, we can simply not approve the applications using the FCC and the Department of Homeland Security language. The city can also send a letter to the telecommunications companies they have contracts with using the FCC and Department of Homeland Security language, informing them that only non-essential activities like maintenance and repair of existing installations is allowed, nothing more. We look forward to your reply. Thank you. Secondly, I would like to invite you to meet us for lunch online next Wednesday, April 22nd from noon till 1 p.m. For Thriving Safely in the Age of Wireless Technology with Cecilia Doucette, a wonderful technology safety educator based out of Massachusetts. Now that we're all at home and on our devices more than ever, CC will share what we need to know to ensure safe technology for ourselves, our loved ones, and our colleagues. Our secondhand radiation from these devices also affects our pets, plants, and nearby neighbors. Topics will include what science says, what the fine print says, and an overview of the harms and different educational tools and practical tips for reducing risks with your cell phone, tablet, baby monitors, etc. So just go to 5gfreesantabarbara.org and register, and we look forward to connecting with everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Go ahead, Ms. Clerk.
We have 6 additional persons who have called into the meeting. If you would like to speak in general public comment, please click the hand icon in the Go to Webinar panel. Mr. Bakayev, Mr. Mesenbourg, Ms. Cunningham, Ms. Freed, Ms. Ticknor, Ms. Mickey, please go ahead and click the click the hand if you'd like to speak. Madam Mayor, I'm not seeing any additional hands for this item. We do have a hand for Mr. Hess, but since you just spoke, I presume that's for another item. Okay, I think that's it for public comment.
Thank you so much. We'll close public comment and go to our first item for discussion. Ms. Clerk, is that item number 2?
It is. And Madam Mayor, if we could go back, I did just get a message that one of the people that was on hold did wish to speak on public comment.
We'll reopen public comment. Go ahead, please.
So this will be Katie Mickey, and I did just see a hand from Conrad Mesenbourg, so we can also check in with him to see which item he wishes to speak on. Katie Mickey, unfortunately, I do not see, as she's having some tech difficulties, we'll go back to her. We'll go to Conrad Mesenbourg. Mr. Mesenbourg, please mute your TV or computer, state your name, go ahead, you have 3 minutes. And I'm attempting, and Mr. Mesenbourg, you are muted yourself. Go ahead, Mr. Mesenbourg.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much for the time. Hey, first of all, I wanted to thank you guys for everything that you're doing and how well you guys have been handling this crisis, which none of us had any experience, leading up to this and such things. So I don't think you guys are getting enough praise, and you're doing a fantastic job. I really appreciate it. One thing I wanted to address is I've been seeing recently. I've kind of nicknamed it social funneling. As various activities have been closed, parks, playgrounds, things, I've seen people funneling into other activities that are kind of lower down on their preference, but I'm seeing crowding beginning to happen. And this obviously creates some problems for social distancing. And I'm getting to get worried about the increasing amount of restrictions having unintended consequences of funneling more and more people into denser and denser situations. I'm also worried about how this is going to impact first responders in these areas. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was up at, actually not yesterday, this weekend, I was up at Lizard's Mouth in the fog, I had to lead 2 groups of people back to the road. They got lost. If I wasn't there, search and rescue would have been called. These people had never been to Lizard's Mouth before. They'd definitely never been there in the fog. And now they're out of their houses looking for things to do. So this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about when we start taking away activities from people and they start getting themselves into trouble. I know we like to think that we're removing the burden from first responders, but we're just shifting it to a different group of first responders. So just moving forward, I'd like to encourage the city council to kind of be aware of how people will react, and not that they'll just go stay home, which is ideally what we'd all want. If people just went home, watched Netflix and kept themselves, but what they have been doing. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Very good. Ms. Clerk, did the other person come back?
Madam Mayor, we will speak with the next person through Kimmy Van Dyke. I'll select Kimmy Van Dyke again, and she has Katie on the line with her. So this will be Katie and Mickey for public comment. I will unmute you. You have 3 minutes. Please state your name and go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Dear members of the City Council, I am Katie Mickey, a representative of 5G Free Santa Barbara, here to update you on our activity as follow-up to our 90-day pause. 5G Free Santa Barbara is compiling the protective ordinances of many municipalities throughout California, assimilating the guidance of experts in this field, and writing a draft protective ordinance specific to the needs of our community. We are considering multiple aspects of the micro and macro cell facilities, including height, both vertically and horizontally, as well as their effective radiative power. We include the 100,000 plus low orbit satellites that will beam radio frequencies from the skies some 250 miles above. The FCC just granted to SpaceX Communications Corporation a blanket license for 1 million Earth stations that can be placed willy-nilly. These Earth stations are receivers. They will receive signals from the satellites, will be transmitting out to their destinations on Earth, will receive data and transmit that data back up to the satellites. These stations will be operating at a 10.7 gigahertz, which is well over the sub 6 gigahertz being utilized for cellular communications in the new network. Willy-nilly means these Earth stations could be placed anywhere in Santa Barbara. They are not preempted, and local leaders do have legal authority to regulate them. Our council and delegation is offering to work with you and Mr. Colon on this significant matter. We have launched a tower investigation team who will be identifying macro and small cell sites, repeaters, and co-loads in our city. Comprehensive maps of entire cities and states are now available, so we can get a fairly good picture of what is in Santa Barbara. Given the sheer number of towers and antenna already in our area, and the fact that many are well camouflaged, the task is considerable. We're digging through over 800 PDF files from Public Works to obtain A, specific addresses where small wireless communication facilities have been permitted and licensed, B, secure necessary email addresses associated with each wireless facility so that all communications, both hard, copy, and digital, can be secured. C, that all permits and licenses can be viewed. Once we have specific addresses, we can then request to view the actual files of that address.
Your time is up.
Filter in
Your
place
time
to
is
make
up.
the files displayed and more complicated.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Mickey. Go ahead, Ms. Clerk. Anyone else, or we'll close public comment?
Mr. Bakiev, it was somewhat unclear whether in a question to me, whether he wished to speak. I'm going to unmute him briefly. And Mr. Bakiev, if you wanted to speak on this item, please go ahead.
Hello, thanks for letting me speak. I just wanted to make a comment as a person who has participated in development of the software we're currently using GoToWebinar, it's extremely pleasing to know that City Council is using locally developed software tools to help people connect in this time of need. Thank you very much.
Very good. We'll close public comment, Ms. Clerk.
Very good.
Okay. And that leads us to item number 2.
Item 2, Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan Update and Stakeholder Communication and Engagement Plan.
It looks like our staffer is ready to go. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Dakota Corey, and I'm the water supply analyst for the city. Today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of our efforts for long-term water supply planning, which we're calling Water Vision Santa Barbara. The goal of this presentation is to give you a high-level overview of the project and to ask you at the end to endorse our stakeholder engagement approach. In your agenda packet, you'll find a detailed communications and engagement plan if you have further questions. I'm going to start with a project overview of the entire project, and then I'm going to hand the presentation over to Tiffany Myers, who's our stakeholder engagement lead from Water Systems Consulting, or WSC. At the end, we'll have a question and answer session, and I have Jeff Seitel, the project manager from WSC, on the line, as well as Joshua Hagmark, our water resources manager. Next slide, please. So first, we'll have a quick overview of the project purpose and what it'll provide to the city. Next slide. As you know, the city of Santa Barbara has one of the most diverse water supply portfolios in the state. We have 8 distinct water supply sources that serve the city. This diversity helps us to provide reliability in times of drought, as we've experienced in the last couple of years. In addition, this complexity of our water supply portfolio makes it more of a challenge to plan for our water needs in the future. Each of our water supply sources has a unique set of characteristics. For example, some of our sources may be relatively inexpensive, but less reliable during a drought. Other sources may be more expensive, but quite reliable. Further yet, some projects require capital investments to fully maximize their potential, and others may be more affected by environmental or water quality regulations. As we explore our future water supply options, these characteristics, as well as our community's values, will be taken into consideration. Next slide, please. There are several rapidly evolving challenges threatening Santa Barbara's water supply reliability and cost. The need for a resilient, diverse water supply that can adapt to these changing conditions has never been more important. Water Vision Santa Barbara aims to address these emerging and evolving challenges through a robust sensitivity testing and scenario analysis. Next slide, please. By June 2021, Water Vision Santa Barbara aims to develop the city's water supply and management plan for the next 30 years. The city is using a rigorous technical process and inclusive stakeholder engagement approach to create an equitable, resilient, environmentally friendly, and cost-effective plan that reflects the community's deepest values. The resulting Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan will outline the city's proposed portfolio of water supply sources and its approach to sustainably manage those sources long into the future. Next slide, please. We can actually go on to the next slide. Okay, so this slide outlines, I'm sorry, can we revert back to the previous slide? Okay, thank you. As you know, the city of Santa Barbara has traditionally used 2 different water supply documents to manage our water supplies. Our 2011 long-term water supply plan, which was last updated when we were working on the general plan, and also our urban water management plan, which we last updated in 2015 and is mandated by the state. The challenges that we face in our water supply situation moving forward are such that we need a robust planning approach to figure out our roadmap for the next 30 years. Thus, we're going to take a triple bottom line approach to looking at our water supplies. A triple bottom line approach looks at both the social, environmental, and economic characteristics of each of our potential water supply portfolios and is able to evaluate them In the past, we've evaluated our water supplies based mainly on cost and somewhat on availability or reliability. So this is going to be a deeper approach. We're also going to use a robust stakeholder engagement process that really digs deep into the values of our community in order to understand what our most important concerns are around water supply. Next slide. This slide outlines the 5 steps to Santa Barbara's water vision, and I'm just going to walk you through the slide a little bit since some of the font is small. So if we start in the upper left-hand corner, you can see that step 1 is to confirm our future water supply goals. Moving right across the slide, you'll see that step 2 is where we're going to evaluate our existing water supply portfolio. Moving on to step 3, we'll develop future water supply portfolios, and in step 4, we'll finalize the future portfolio that best suits our community's needs. Finally, in step 5, we'll document all of our efforts in an adaptable water supply plan. I also want to point your attention to the lower left-hand corner of the slide where you see a yellow triangle that says "We are here." So you can see that we're currently engaged in step 1 of this process, and we're meeting with City Council highlighted in yellow. You'll see moving to the right of the slide that there's 3 other opportunities where we hope to engage City Council at key project decisions, ultimately culminating in your adoption of our plan. You'll also see that we have a detailed stakeholder engagement plan, including a stakeholder group meetings for the general public, as well as meetings with Water Commission. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Tiffany Meyer, who's going to describe in more detail this public engagement process.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. Ms. Meyer?
Thank you so much for having me, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm happy to be here. As most of you know, Santa Barbara has a long history of making water supply decisions that reflect the community's values, and this project definitely has that same intention. Yet it also goes further than past efforts by creating more deliberate opportunities for stakeholders to inform those decisions, and as best we can, surface any unforeseen impacts or even inequities in those decisions well in advance. And with COVID-19 as our unfortunate immediate reality, thankfully we've successfully transitioned the next few months of those engagement experiences from in-person workshops to a virtual setting. And we're doing that to protect, of course, protect the health of all involved, but also keep that project on schedule and the experiences meaningful. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So thankfully, I bring quite a bit of experience in designing and leading virtual engagement for projects like these, so I can confidently say that the team is in good hands. Go ahead and move to the next slide. Actually, the next slide after that. There you go. All right, so thinking about our approach to stakeholder engagement, we've divided all stakeholders into the 4 groups that you see here. Each group will be engaged in a slightly different way based on the role that they play in the project. So reading from left to right, we first have the Water Vision stakeholder group. That's kind of our primary group that will be engaging, a 22-member group. Both that stakeholder group and the general public, their role is really to share their perceptions of the community's values and needs, and we're going to use that to inform key decisions for the project. Water Commission, of course, advises City Council on the final water portfolio, and City Council makes that final decision for the future water portfolio and the implementation plan. Now, if we do our job well, Water Commission and City Council will reach those decisions having confidence that that final decision reflects the long-term values and needs of the community. And stakeholders will not only be more aware of how water policy decisions are made, where their water comes from, and their role in ongoing water management, but they'll even advocate for that plan that the city has approved. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So what activities will get us there? Well, as Dakota was mentioning, we're using a combination of workshops, public meetings, as well as general outreach. We'll have 5 interactive and educational workshops for that stakeholder group. Beginning this Thursday, we'll have their first webinar, and 2 for the general public, and those will be educational as well as interactive. And from those workshops, we'll curate that stakeholder input on very specific project topics. For each of those workshops, maybe 1 or 2 key topics that we'll ask them to weigh in on. And as stakeholder input is collected, we'll create a feedback loop by documenting that input, those perceptions in an actionable way, and sharing that back with Water Commission and City Council. In addition, we'll have those designated public meetings, as Dakota was mentioning, and community-wide outreach activities. And those are designed to keep stakeholders informed, raise awareness, as I mentioned, and build trust in that resulting decision. In fact, education plays a really consistent role in our approach. We know better than anybody that this work can get really complicated and full of jargon. And so we're working really hard to de-jargon our message and really meet those stakeholders where they are. And that includes City Council, it includes Water Commission. Next slide, please. So these next 2 slides are included in the communication and engagement plan, but we wanted to show you the deliberate diversity of the stakeholder group. So we started by identifying 8 broad constituent segments, as you see listed here. And those all represent kind of the uses and users of water, as well as folks that are close to the common issues and challenges with how we manage water, where our water comes from. And those, then we invited 22 community leaders, organizations representing all 8 segments to participate. And most of those folks are also Santa Barbara residents. So they have kind of a double interest. If you can go to the next slide. And as you can see here, some of this print is a little small, but as I mentioned, it's also in the communication and engagement plan in your agenda packet. While the group size is still manageable at 22 people, it's also inclusive and diverse. And but we also want to acknowledge that if you feel we've left any critical voice or perspective out of this group, we of course want to know. And as we consider adding organizations, we want to be cautious not to disrupt the equity of the group. A good example is, let's say that we decided we wanted to add 4 more environmental groups that represent kind of the environmental health of the ocean. That would disrupt that balance, that equity, because that voice would have more voices to it. It'd be a little bit louder. So we want to just have that as a key consideration as we do add folks to the list. Now, the question was raised recently by a water commissioner as he noticed that under land use, you see the City of Santa Barbara Parks and Recreation Commission. That's the only commission you see on this list. And so we raised a really great question of, should we possibly include the Planning Commission, a member of the Planning Commission as well? Or alternatively, should we not include any commissions? And we also kind of weighed that question in creating this final list, and landed on including the Parks and Rec Commission because it is one of the city's bigger water users. So that's how we resulted in that decision. But welcome that question and discussion in the Q&A. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Joshua, who will manage our Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, council members, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resource Manager. Be happy to take any and all of your questions at this time.
So to my colleagues, it looks like Ms. Harmon was first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much. Hi, Mr. Hagmark. I just had a question about the point that was just brought up regarding the Planning Commission and Parks and Rec Commission. And I totally understand that that parks are a big water user. But I'm wondering whether the Planning Commission will have an opportunity to review this at some point if they're not included in the stakeholder group, because part of my concern is with the increase in housing that we're likely to see in the numbers, water is a big part of that conversation, and therefore Planning Commission is relevant. So I was wondering if you could just speak to what their involvement is, if any, or their opportunity to participate, and if they don't have any, whether we might want to consider adding them into the land use category.
Thank you. Great question, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Harmon. Maybe if you can go back a slide and we can take a look at the list. We did spend a lot of time. We are working very closely with the community development staff right now as they are rewriting the or updating the Plan Santa Barbara, given the state's regulations for housing. And so we're working closely with them, but you'll notice on the list, we do have quite a few land development organizations in there, architects. We had, sorry, can you go back one slide? Is there a way to go back? Yes. We have our local architects, landscapers, also our local contractors are involved in there. And I think just to clarify too, the City of Santa Barbara Parks and Recreation, as you know, the city parks represent one of the largest land holders in the city. And so that specifically, the land use is why they're in there as well. They kind of have that dual role. But we did feel like we had a good representation in here for the perspectives of development and how that is going to impact the community. Certainly it's the discretion of the council. And if they would like to see additional representation in that area, but we felt like we tried to balance that. We also, of course, have our citizens group. We have Allied Neighborhoods, Neighborhood Advisory Council. And of course, you'll notice we have Mission Canyon in there. Even though they're outside of the city, they are city water customers.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my only follow-up to that would be to the extent that any commissioner is involved in this community-based process, whether it's Parks and Rec, Planning Commission, or any other commission. Oh, you can't hear me? I think Josh can't hear me.
We can hear you. It seems
Okay.
Mr. Hagmark is having issues. So we will pause
Lost
for
my
a
audio.
moment. Oh, we can hear you. Can you hear us now, Mr. Hagmark? He's
Hello?
working on it. Okay.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you have
Sorry.
another question then, Ms.
I
Herman?
apologize.
Thank you. No, I'm sorry. This technical stuff is tough. I just wanted to know whether to the extent any commissioner is involved in this community stakeholder process, whether Parks and Rec or Planning Commission or whomever, do they have any role or influence beyond that of the other community members? Or are they just, it's the same level of input across the board, despite the fact that they're affiliated with the city?
Right, there's no additional, I mean, this committee versus the other, I mean, let me back up. I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to go and present to the Planning Commission if there's an interest from them. We're happy to keep them involved in the process as we go along. This stakeholder group was intended to help guide us and really get some of that meaningful, I mean, ideally it'd be nice to have that kind of working relationship with all of our customers, but we've tried to come up with a group that to represent all those people. And to be honest with you, our hope here is that we can, it's a two-way road in which we hope to get feedback from them, but to also educate and have these members go back to their various organizations and also educate their membership. And that with that, we feel like we're getting a pretty broad perspective of education here.
Oh, yes. No, my question was just, take, for example, at one of these stakeholder group meetings, the Parks and Recreation Commissioner wouldn't have a vote that's weighted more heavily than, say, the member from Casa de la Raza, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Apologize.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, Josh. Can you hear me?
Yes, Councilmember Jordan.
How are you?
Good.
I really just have questions on this list too out of the whole presentation, and I'll try and pose them as questions as I go down the row and sort of get my comments in on those questions as you're used to. So in the economic development category, did you consider adding in either Hospitality Santa Barbara or the Goleta Chamber?
We did not consider the Goleta Chamber. We ultimately landed on Visit Santa Barbara. We felt like that we gave that broader perspective on there. and Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce, obviously. But
So I will just give you my quick 2 cents on that. Hospitality Santa Barbara is essentially a working group that's similar to Visit Santa Barbara. Because Visit Santa Barbara board just directs their staff who are already doing marketing, whereas you could find actually working component members in Hospitality Santa Barbara. So you might want to think about that. And then Goleta Chamber right now seems to me to have a ton of local Santa Barbara businesses and representatives on their roster. And so you might just think about reaching out to them without disrupting your percentages. Next one down, I just questioned on the really low percentage for the human rights to water. And is there not a way to get that percentage up? I cruised around a little on the web today, and Environmental Defense Center actually has a water projects or water rights working group. Did they not get considered to be part of that group?
You know, we really struggled with that, trying to find groups. I mean, even even the folks that we did have on there, they struggled to try and get someone together to be on this group. And so we are open. Like, again, this list, I think if the council feels strongly that we should be adding an additional, and they have some ideas about who, if the majority of the council agrees today, we'd be happy to pursue adding an additional group to that. But we were kind of, again, we've batted this around, but we were kind of running out of what groups could be a good representative for the human rights to water.
I agree. But as you know, too, we're mandated to give those groups consideration for this process also, right? So I think it just kind of sits up and throws a flag that it's the, you know, other than ag, which is kind of a regional issue, that in this city we can't find somebody else to help us with the right to clean, affordable water for its residents. So I'd hope you'd look a little further there. And then in the land use section, I kind of agree with their response on the Planning Commission that they'll get a bite at this anyhow, so they can follow. But I was wondering too about 2 other groups, and then one would be a legal group that frequently plays in both local and regional water groups. And of course, Brownstein comes right up when I think of that. And I'm just wondering if you had thought about putting somebody in who works in water use law, whether it's on housing or land use or watershed protections, and why not?
You know, we really weren't headed down that aspect of it. We were really looking to get a sense from the community of what the priorities were. Again, going back to those 3 elements that we were looking for, which was environmental, social, and economic impacts. And so this group is really helping us in weighing what are the most important aspects of it. And within those elements, there will be weighted issues that we're going to be tackling. This group here is intended to help us weigh those. None of these folks here need to be experts in water. We plan to spend quite a bit of time educating, and all the materials that we're going to be providing to this group will be publicly available as well. So we're going to spend a lot of time educating, and we'll record those meetings as well, record the presentations that we do, but educating and getting that feedback. And so having any particular law experience, it really doesn't, it's not to say that some of these folks won't put forward folks that may have a legal background, but it's not something, if you use water in Santa Barbara, you're perfectly qualified for this. For this group.
Kind of to that end too, do you think somebody like the Rental Property Association is redundant with the Association of Realtors? I kind of view that as they're the real hands on the ground to all the tenants and the multi-use water issues at the ground level than more so the realtors.
We're certainly open to this. Like you said, we tried to keep this list somewhat manageable. If you want to put that forward as a recommendation and
a suggestion.
Yeah.
Just a suggestion. And then the last one really is, you know, we're blessed locally that we actually have 2 representatives of the regional board that live here in town. One of them you're welcome, is on the Water Commission, but the other one also is a local resident, Jane Gray. And I'm just wondering if there's a spot for somebody like that on this list too, who really has a perspective that is both local, regional, and statewide in, you know, right to water, watershed protection, homeless issues, all that kind of stuff, right down to the user basis. And is there room for somebody like that or a suggestion?
There could be. We had initially weighed that, whether or not we wanted to bring in some of these outside government agencies to be on the panel. But ultimately, we landed on wanting to keep these folks local. And certainly those are going to be stakeholders as we develop information. We plan to share that. We would welcome any feedback from the regional board and the state and DWR is going to get a copy of the information we're putting together. So we are looking for ultimately feedback, and if they have thoughts, we hope to get that from them. And like you mentioned, we're very fortunate to have Water Commissioner Young on to also help us bring the perspective of the regional board to us.
Okay, that's great. Those are really just my suggestions. You know, my suggestion for Jane is really she's not functioning in a regional government position. She would actually just be lending her really valuable personal and professional expertise. But those are just, I'm not going to sit here and lobby for how this gets done better or to mine. Those would just be my suggestions if any of them rise up and you want to grab at them. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Sneddon, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's nice to see you, Mr. Hagmark, in this format. I had a couple just really quick questions. First, I love the new graphic that has the 8 water sources and how they're all coming through, really nice. So could you go back to just clarifying, we have the long-term water supply plan, the urban water management plan, and then we have our water vision. And just to help us tie those all together, the differences or one is the master plan or how you want to describe that?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sutton, thank you so much. And I do apologize. We are trying to kind of clean things up at the end of the day and make it a little more streamlined. So the state requires us to do this urban water management plan every 5 years. And typically what we would do is, as a city, we were doing a long-term water supply plan every 10. And so we would just take stuff from our long-term water supply plan, put it in this format that was required by the state and submit that. And looking at it, we felt like it'd be more powerful if we combine those efforts into one effort. And that's why got to keep in mind, there's a lot of water districts and water agencies in California that literally have 1 or 2 supplies. Very few have 7, 8 sources of water. And so that's why I've kind of said enhanced, because the urban water management plan in a lot of ways has a lot of box checking that the state requires you to do. We're intending this to be a much more inclusive and extensive evaluation of our supplies. And that's why we are adopting the enhanced urban water management plan, which we intend to do every 10 years is what our goal is, or as needed, depending on how our supplies change and that plan changes. But with that perspective, this plan is intended to look out for the needs of our community for the next 30 years and ask those big questions about what is climate change doing? Where are we headed with demands, population growth, all of those things as a community we're constantly weighing. And so this is going to have a long-term perspective at the end.
So this goes beyond our compliance documents that we need to provide.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is going to easily check all the boxes that DWR and I think meet the needs that we as a community want to do in our planning. I think the state's planning is, again, they came up with a plan that works for an agency that all they have is groundwater or all they get is some have a reservoir water. So this is a much more extensive outreach and evaluation, really.
Thank you. And then for the stakeholder webinars, are those open to the public or are those closed meetings with the stakeholders and then you report out to Water Commission incrementally, or is it one big recommendation at the end of that?
Yeah, so we're going to be having these stakeholder meetings. All the documents that are produced and provided to these stakeholders will be available to the public. We will be recording our presentations to that stakeholder group. I don't know that we were going to record the comments and inputs of everybody, but we certainly be documenting that input. We're still weighing exactly this new format, how this would work, and how could the public just watch that stakeholder engagement. I don't think for this first meeting we were intending to do that, but we were wanting to make all the information, all the feedback we got publicly available. So we did want to preserve the ability for people to ask all the questions they wanted and not feel like they are they're on TV per se. We wanted them to speak freely. We'll capture that data. We're going to try and bring it together into some common themes and thoughts so that we can message that back out to Water Commission and City Council.
Great. I think that's a great approach, just by the way. And then what would be the very first opportunity that the public would have to participate in a workshop or something open to the public?
Well, we're going to be, if we go back in our slide presentation, we have got a couple. So we're going to be talking at Water Commission this Thursday. And I know we cut our presentation a little short for City Council Day because you guys just have such a busy agenda. But for Water Commission, we're going to be going a little deeper on Thursday and talking about this. So there's an opportunity there. And then we'll be coming back to Water Commission on July 16th. And reporting out on some of the progress we're made, and then leading up to a public meeting on September 24th. So we're going to actually have some good data to review at that point. And then again, Water Commission in October, City Council on the 20th of October, and so on, as we start to really pull together all this information. Right now, our team is really going through and doing the data crunching right now. And so the first couple stakeholder meetings is just educating and bringing our stakeholder group up to speed on all the various city supplies and what are all the challenges that each one of those supplies are facing.
Great. And then just one more question for the Rights to Water group. I guess maybe it's a comment, but also a question. I think it'd be great to have Chumash representation on that. And I guess I could ask it as a question if you consider that, but instead I'll just leave it as a recommendation that might be a good place to include a voice on rights to water.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other council members wanting to ask questions? I'm assuming we have some people who want to do public comment, but I will ask a couple of questions. So the first public workshop, Mr. Hagmark, is September 24th, but of course you're saying the public can participate in the Water Commission discussions, and those are virtual right now, but people can call in, right? Are you doing them at 630 Garden Street, or where are they?
We're going to be doing them just like City Council here. We're going to be doing the go-to webinar for Water Commission starting this Thursday. That's our trial run with that. But I do want to highlight that we are going to be setting up a Trust and High Regard website for this Water Vision Santa Barbara. So every time we meet with our stakeholder groups and we are presenting information, we're going to be putting stuff on that. And so you can go onto that website, the public can go on there and sign up. Anytime new information is added, they will be sent an email saying, hey, new information is available. You can come and check out that new information. And so we want to try and keep that information flowing. Our intent with some of that is that these stakeholders in our workshops can take those back to their community groups and also share it. So really wanting to disseminate information as we create it. So there's going to be a lot of information constantly being added to our website as we develop it. So I'm hoping there are going to be a lot of opportunities and a lot of information for the public to follow along. And then, of course, come and share their thoughts at Water Commission, the general public meeting, and of course, any City Council meeting that any of the 4 City Council meetings we have.
Great. So people are at home more, and if they wanted to get engaged in this process, here's an opportunity to do something, focus on something interesting. So if you would put up the stakeholder graphic again, And I will phrase it as a question because we still are in question mode. So for agricultural water users, did you consider any of the orchards that we have in our, I think we have avocado growers in the city limits. I mean, and the other thing I was thinking when Mr. Jordan was talking is that all these groups that don't get included on this can participate in other ways. I would also ask did you think of cause, because they look out for people who work in agriculture and for human rights to water. I would ask you if you consider, there's a group called Food and Water Watch, and I can find their contact information for you. I was also going to ask if you had considered the Barbareño Chumash Tribal Council. So we all have contacts for people who work with, who have been active in water rights and water quality rights. So
Madam Mayor, yeah, we did spend, and I think we would appreciate the council had any thoughts on that. If they could take an action today on it, that would be really helpful. We did our best to try and come up with a list and balance it, keeping in mind that our agriculture uses less than 1% of the city's water. It still is an important priority to Water Commission and Council that we preserve the ag that we have. And so we did bring in the Farm Bureau. We hope with their connections in the community, they're going to engage. So the idea is that they're going to be bringing this perspective here, but then also taking it back and talking to their growers in town and sharing that information, getting feedback and coming back to us. By no means is this the only way to engage. I'm glad you brought that up. Any other groups that want to can follow along, can sign up, and as we generate information, can grab onto that. It would be really helpful for staff if there was, you made some great, put forth some great names. If there was consensus by the council to add those names, we would be happy to follow up and get those added. Again, we're trying to balance this and make sure that we don't get, too out of whack, but I think there's room certainly to add some human rights to water. We were really struggling to find and get feedback from people that would actually be able to participate.
And I agree with Mr. Jordan that the Rental Property Association is closer to water use than the Association of Realtors. So I would ask my colleagues while we go to public comment to be thinking about switching that one out, adding cause, Food Water Watch, and we'll find a representative from the coastal Chumash community.
I might recommend that we don't eliminate anybody, but you can add, because I feel like we've got some of these people, we've spent a lot of time right now with a representative from each one of these groups to kind of bring them up to speed. And I think they're really excited about being engaged. And so I think we're looking to add, if there's additional members that we would need to reach out to, I think that's what we'd want to do.
Well, that's good advice. Thank you. So we'll go to public comment. Ms. Gorman, do you have people lined up?
Hello, Madam Mayor and Council. If there are members of the public that wish to speak on this item, please indicate that you wish to raise your hand. Click on the hand in the GoToWebinar panel. At this point, Madam Mayor, well, there are 8 members of the public total. No one has raised their hand to speak for this item.
Okay, then we'll open the floor to the council members. We don't need to take a vote on this. It was an update, but we need to let Mr. Hagmark know if we agree with the suggestions made by myself, Ms. Sneddon, and Mr. Jordan. We're not eliminating anyone, but we're adding. Go ahead, Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would agree with the list as you gave and the additions by Mr. Jordan as well. I believe you said cause, Food and Water Watch, Barbareño Chumash, and a representative of the Renters Association. I think those would be really great additions.
Mr. Jordan.
I agree also. Good catch on cause. I like that one for the human rights to water. So that's a good catch. So I would agree with those 4 also.
Okay, Mr. Casey, our city administrator, is in the chambers with me. Mr. Casey, do we need to take a vote on that, do you think? Or I don't see any objection from my colleagues. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I think staff is able to hear the input from council. It seemed like there was general consensus on that. So I think that's good enough information for us to proceed with that.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Hagmark, as we close this out, you could just remind the public that we're doing pretty well with our water supply, and they have so much going on.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. I did want to end on that. We will be coming back to you next month. Actually, we're going back to Water Commission next month. It may be the first part of June, but we'll have our water supply update. So we'll kind of reflect on where we ended this rainy season, and then we'll also be reflecting on the impacts of COVID-19 on water usage in the community and demand. So it'll be a pretty comprehensive update, and so we look forward to bringing that back and having a full public discussion on that.
And to be perfectly clear, the virus is not a waterborne problem, and people don't need to worry about our supply or the quality of the water. Can you tell us about that?
That's correct. Our water supply is safe, and COVID-19 is new in some ways, but it's the structure of the virus is something that our treatment process is designed to eliminate. And so very confident that will not be a problem in our community. Our community can trust the water that's coming out of their tap to keep them safe, and we're going to keep that flowing. We've got a nice plan in place to keep our employees safe, to make sure that water keeps flowing and that the wastewater system continues to operate, protecting the environment and public health as well.
With thanks, Mr. Hagmark, we sign off with you, and we'll close this item.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, Ms. Gorman, our next item is number 3.
Yes, item 3, resolution in support of the Upper De La Vena Street Vision Zero Safety Project. Recommendation of the council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara supporting the Upper De La Vena Street Vision Zero Safety Project and directing staff to apply for a grant to fund design, environmental review, and construction. And if I might just remind members of the public, if you are calling in to speak on an item, now that we are on item 3, Upper De La Vena, please hit the raise your hand function in GoToWebinar. And when we get to public comment, we'll call on you. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dayton, are you ready to give a presentation?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Excellent, Madam Mayor, council members, thank you. We're here to talk to you today about 2 Vision Zero projects, the Upper De La Vena Street Vision Zero project, and then also Milpas, which is the next item. So we go to the next slide. The active transportation program has been very successful for the city of Santa Barbara. Over $40 million we've received to date. One of the questions we had this week from council members is a little concern about if we put too many of proposals in, are we competing with ourselves? And actually, that has been one of the things that has made Santa Barbara so successful in the past, is that you actually aren't really competing against yourself unless there's a tie right at the breaker of the funding, then possibly that could happen. But otherwise, if you have a competitive project, you're competing with the whole state. And if you have 4, which we're proposing 4, and they all score within the funding score limit, then they all get funded. So it's really important that we continue to go ahead and put in as many applications as we have that are competitive. And that's why we've got that $40 million already in our hands. And so working on more. We're proposing 4 grants. Staff is proposing 4 grants. 2 of them we've already discussed with council. That was the Cliff Drive and the West Side projects. And then today, 2 would be, we're going to talk about here, De La Vena, and then next, the Milpas corridor. Next slide. The De La Vena corridor, you may recall we were with council the end of last year, talking about the De La Vena, the lower part that we're actually under contract with now to design And the whole corridor is a Vision Zero corridor. We are working, the existing project is down at the lower part. And next slide. The part we're talking about now is, we'd call it the Cottage Hospital area. So between Constance and Padre, which is right north of Mission. Next slide. So that's this area right here, a little bit more blown up. You can see it, Constance, and the project will extend down to Padre. As you recall, we were talking about in the last project in Lower De La Vina, we were talking about going to one lane, and this project also requires us to go to one lane. So we want to be really careful to talk to you about how that works. And Derek Bailey's on the call to help us with that. Next slide. The Vision Zero analysis for this corridor is real. We can reduce collisions from 2014 to 2019. We have a total of 56 reported collisions, 38 injuries, 2 most serious pedestrian and cyclist. Most common is the side swipe, but we talked about this last time in Lower De La Vina. You see the graphic there. It's where the motorist gets a little confused because there's not a lot of traffic on the street and makes a left turn from the number 2 lane. And then someone comes up and T-bones them as they turn left. That we had 15 out of the 56 on that one. And then also broadsides, which is the side street, cars going across 2 lanes on the side streets. All of these collisions would be addressed by this project. Then next slide, the bicycle master plan would be implemented in this section. So we have Vision Zero, bicycle master plan, and the pedestrian master plan all being implemented. So for the bicycle master plan, you can see the green lines represent, the solid ones are bicycle facilities that are already in place. And we have circled there the section of De La Vina, which completes the southbound link. The opposing connection is Chapala, which is right to the east of that. And as you come down De La Vina as a cyclist, this would be very helpful. And then you can make your way either to Castillo or State Street for the completion of your trip down to downtown. Next slide. The pedestrian master plan specifically calls out this corridor for intersection improvements. One of the issues we have on De La Vina is the lack of yielding. That's where a vehicle does not see a pedestrian, and by the time they see him and they're going at speed, they don't have time to stop. So these specific intersections improvements called out by the pedestrian master plan are for curb extensions, and we'll tell you a little bit about that. Next slide. Curb extensions are important because they do a couple of things. And this is a graphic of a typical curb extension. First of all, they increase pedestrian mobility, visibility. So someone's at that intersection, they're going to cross. You can see the cone of vision of the motorist. When the pedestrian is positioned further out on that curb extension, they're more visible. And then the motorist is more likely to see them. As a second point, it would increase their ability to yield, and it's been proven to show that. And then the other great thing is that if we have safety problems with these intersections because of visibility, if we put a curb extension in, that means we don't have to remove on-street parking. We can keep the parking all the way up to the intersection. So by putting curb extensions in, we actually retain on-street parking. Next slide. These are the locations throughout the Cottage neighborhood, so De La Vina, and then a couple other locations that we're proposing to put the curb extensions to increase yielding and better pedestrian crossings as a part of the grant. Next slide. And then this is Bass Street. This is the typical way a De La Vina would look, with one lane, with a bike buffer and the bike facility. As you see, you're very familiar with Castillo and Bath. But the real question is, and we had some comments about this, what can this section of De La Vina actually be okay with one lane? And we have a lot of people who are trying to come downtown. De La Vina is a busy street. what will be the implications of going to one lane to get these safety benefits? What are we sacrificing? So we're going to bring Derek Bailey on the line, and we'll go to the next slide, and he'll explain a little bit about that.
Mr. Bailey.
Madam Mayor, good afternoon. It's good to see you. It's a great question. Upper De La Vena is a busy street, and we were wrestling with this on how to improve safety in that section of De La Vena Street, as well as implement elements of the pedestrian master plan and the bike master plan. So our group, Traffic Engineering, we took a deep dive into the traffic operations on De La Vena Street over the winter. And what we did, the first thing, we did a computer model, and the computer model suggested that the street can function as one lane, no problem. Our concern though is if we take all the traffic on De La Vena Street and we concentrate it into one lane, will there be enough gaps in traffic for pedestrians and side street traffic to get across De La Vena? So this past winter, before all the traffic volume started to drop off due to the COVID, we actually went out and closed a traffic lane for a day, and we did measurements. So we measured travel time, we measured side street delay, and what we found is there was virtually no difference from having De La Vena 2 lanes versus De La Vena 1 lane. Travel time went up by between 7 and 10 seconds, depending on the time of day. And side street delay was virtually the same. So we're pretty confident from a traffic operations perspective that De La Vena Street will function just fine as a 1-lane street.
Excellent. Next.
Turn it back to Mr. Dayton.
So next slide. We took this project to the Transportation Circulation Committee and reviewed it with them. They found it to be consistent with all 4 of the council's documents: the Bicycle Master Plan, PED Plan, Vision Zero, and the circulation element. Next slide. So finally, what we're looking for is a recommendation to adopt a resolution for this project, and then direct staff to go ahead and do the active transportation planning grant to the state of California. And Derek and I are both available to answer any questions you might have.
To my colleagues, does anyone have questions so far on this presentation? Go ahead, Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Dayton. I apologize if I missed this in your presentation. I'm just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how the neighbors in this area have received this plan and what the feedback has been from them, and how you've engaged with them about this particular piece of the plan.
Thank you, Councilmember Harmon. Yeah, this one is different. This particular plan is a little bit different than the other ones that we've done for like the West Side, and for the MODOC plan, a part of the piece of the West Side and Cliff, and for Milpas, the one we're about to do, because all 3 of these are, those projects are not in any city plans. The difference with this project is it had a very robust conversation in the bicycle master plan and in the pedestrian master plan, which is a little old at this point. I'd say it's probably 11 or 12 years old. And then Vision Zero, we're just bringing it to the council because these are the collision patterns we hear. So we have not been we haven't done any specific public outreach to this neighborhood in the past months, aside from next door and then going to the Transportation Circulation Committee, simply because we're implementing the plans that were already fully vetted with the public.
Awesome, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Mr. Jordan, your turn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, Mr. Dayton. So the only consequence I see sometimes on this is what happens at signalized intersections when you go to 1 lane going through that intersection, with the cars having to queue up for pedestrians and stack up for somebody walking very slowly across the intersection going the same way as the cars. I've noticed a couple signals around town where I'm assuming they're not working correctly, but they're actually the walk sign is turning green for a 3 or 4 or 5 count before the signal actually turns green. Will those type of upgrades just automatically be part of the signaling when you make these one lane improvements?
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. You bring up really good points. When you have only one lane going in a traffic signal, it's a much different situation because the capacity of the signal is reduced by half for that leg of the intersection. And it is for that reason that this one laning project stops right at Padre and does not extend to Mission Street where the signal is. So the entire length that we're talking about does not run through any traffic signal.
Not signalized, right? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, we had the same conversation at De La Vena and Carrillo, where literally if you're lined up there in the right-hand turn lane in front of Starbucks, you can literally miss a whole signal green light waiting for people to get across Carrillo in the crosswalk because of that. And it is not an accident that some of those walk signs are turning green early, is it?
No, that's Derek Bailey's handiwork. They're very good. He can come on and tell you about them. But what he does is when he turns the pedestrian signal on first before initiating the green for motorists, is he's giving the pedestrians a little chance to get out so that they can be seen. They're going to be safer if they're seen. When they're on the corner, that motorist is out of that cone of the vision, less likely to see them. So kudos to our amazing traffic engineer. Just the creativity that he does to make our city safer is absolutely amazing.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Friedman, go ahead.
Thank you. I didn't see it in there, so I just wanted to check, is there any issues with losses of parking spaces with this plan?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, we would not anticipate any loss of parking. If anything, we will see more parking go back on the street than was before. And that is simply because what I was saying about the curb extension is that right now we have to put red curb in to get more visibility at the intersection. But when we put those curb extensions in, then the parking can go almost nearly to the intersection. So this strategy is going to be a on-street parking plus.
That is great news. Usually it's the opposite. So I'm happy to hear that. Thank you. No further questions.
Thanks. If there's no other questions from the City Council, we can go to public comment. Ms. Gorman, are there people raising their hand over there?
Hi, Madam Mayor and council members. Yes, we have one public speaker who has raised their hand for this item, Ms. Sanford. Ms. Sanford, I will call on you in a minute. In the meantime, if any of the other people who have called in and wish to speak on this item, please hit the raise your hand function on your software. Ms. Sanford, I will go ahead and let's see if I can unmute you. It looks like actually your audio is off, and I'm going to see if there's something I can do on this. In the meantime, I'm going to ask, there we go. Okay. Ms. Sanford, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay, are you still there? I'm still here.
Go ahead, Ms. Sanford. We can hear you. It looks like we are having an issue with Ms. Sanford. Let me try this one more time. It looks like Ms. Sanford's audio is not connected. Ms. Sanford, if you would like to send us an email to the clerk at santabarbaraca.gov, we'd be happy to pass along that information to mayor and council. Last call, if there's any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item, raise your hand. Madam Mayor, I'm not seeing any other hands.
Thanks so much, Madam Clerk. And we'll look for deliberative comments or a motion. It looks like we need to adopt this resolution and then direct staff to apply for the grant, conduct environmental review. Oh, a grant to fund design, environmental review and construction.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, okay, so Mr. Friedman has moved the motion. I think we're having trouble with Ms.
I'll
Mr.
second.
Jordan.
I second.
Okay.
Oh,
We'll get you on the next one, Ms. Gutierrez, thanks. So we have a motion by Mr. Friedman and a second by Mr. Jordan. Is there any other discussion on this item and to the motion? It looks like we're ready to vote. So Ms. Clerk, to the public, we always take a roll call vote when people are participating by remote. So we'll go ahead and get ready for that.
Very good. This is for item number 2, motion for the recommended action, motion by Councilmember Friedman, seconded by Councilmember Jordan. To vote here, Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez.
yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Snedden.
Yes.
And Mayor Murillo.
Aye. So that was unanimous, Ms. Clerk.
Correct.
And we'll go ahead and close that item with thanks to Mr. Dayton and Mr. Bailey. And we'll move on to item number 4. Ms. Clerk, ready?
Absolutely. Item 4, resolution in support of pedestrian safety enhancements along Milpas Street. Recommendation the council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara supporting pedestrian safety enhancements along Milpas Street and directing staff to apply for a grant to fund design, environmental review, and construction. And again, just a reminder, anyone who wishes to speak on this item from the public, please raise your hand. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Dayton.
Okay, Madam Mayor, council members back again, and we appreciate the thanks, and I just want to recognize that there's a great team of people behind us, particularly those who are filling out these active transportation planning grants through June. This next project is a Milpas, and I got to tell you, Milpas is a whole nother thing. And when we come to the community, this street serves so many people in our town, and so when we talked about this street, we wanted to make sure we really brought everyone out. This is the first time we've been talking about it. We didn't include it really in the bicycle master plan. Heavily in discussion, very little in the pedestrian master plan. So this one needed a full vetting from the community. Next slide, please. We're going to be asking you to do a very similar thing as the last item is to do a resolution and direct us to apply for a grant. Next slide. You know, here's the big question is why now? Why are we talking about Milpas now? And I got to tell you, it was super exciting as someone who's been with the city almost 30 years to have wanted to do something with Milpas for such a long time. Well, now we have Measure C. And so as we go through and we're doing paving projects around the city, this is what we do. We look at the street before the paving project. This paving project is probably 5 years out. What do we need to do with this to make the best design possible at the time? This is a Vision Zero high priority corridor. And we wanted to understand, what does the community think? What are they looking for? And of course, there's always that potential of getting an active transportation planning grant so that we can take advantage of those state funds. Next slide. The process we undertook was very engaging. We had a lot of people over at Franklin Center for 2 meetings. We had the listening workshop and then the approach workshop. Both of them had nearly 100 people filling the room, very active discussions, very positive passion around the room over Milpas and what it promises for the East Side community. And of course, we did our Vision Zero analysis and went to the Transportation Circulation Committee. So let us tell you about what we heard. Next slide. This is what we asked in the areas of walking and biking and driving and parking and lighting. What's working, what's not working, what needs to be changed, and what needs to stay the same. These are the 4 questions that we have nailed down in our listening workshops that people really want to engage around. Next slide. So here's what they told us about walking. The very varied responses on crossings and the pedestrian flashers, some finding them very helpful, others wanting more, wanting flashers at other locations. Hard to cross the Milpas roundabout, we heard that. Sidewalks are narrow and in poor condition. And this is really the beginning and the end of the discussion is all about what is the grandeur of Milpas is the beautiful ficus trees, which provide the wonderful canopy for our community on Milpas, but have really crowded the sidewalks. And so that became kind of the biggest nut for us to crack. Next slide. In terms of bicycling, the pedestrian master or the bicycle master plan has the bike boulevard that's 1 block to the right or east of this picture. And on Alisos, and that project is under design and will be going to construction, I think, at the end of this year or the beginning next year. But that's where we're going to expect the bicyclists in this community. But here's what the community said, that bikes and vehicles do not mix well in Milpas. It's no surprise. It's not a safe or comfortable place for most riders. Concerns about of Memphis being a speedway if bike lanes are removed. We had a discussion about removing some of the bike lanes because of traffic concerns. Bike infrastructure is inconsistent, but they do like the bike lanes. So we had the community kind of wrestling over the bike lane removal. At the end of the day, they wanted to keep them, and more bike parking is needed on the street. But then you have the issue of where do you put it because the sidewalk is already crowded. Next slide. Driving and parking, very interesting. The motorists thought the signal timing is really good. Need to have some left turn arrows, a green assigned right of way. Better visibility for driveways, people thought. General consensus not to reduce any parking. Parking is really important to the Milpas area because it's a service industry street and there's a lot of people that are coming and going all day. And concerns about commercial loading in the center of Milpas Street. That center turn lane being used for loading and offloading, which we've seen around the city. One of the interesting things about Milpas is the number 2 lane. So there's the 1 lane, which is toward the center, number 2 lane against the parking is not used as much as you would think because people are afraid of being too close to the cars and there's a lot of side mirror swipes. Next slide. And then lighting, responses varied on lighting. There were interesting comments about their lights are there, but then when the trees grow over them, they cast a shadow and they're not as effective. So it's tree management and light management. General consensus that the lighting should be improved at intersections. I think we heard that pretty pronounced. Lighting fixtures should be consistent. We have a number of different types, the one that's in the picture and then the cornstalk style that's more near the roundabout. Next slide. And then the street trees. The street trees were a big deal because the issue with the trees, as you can see in the picture, they're very, very large for that very small space passing the tree. And then the roots are continually uplifting the sidewalks and private property. And so that was a big discussion. The tree canopy is very important for the street and the community expressed that aesthetics and shade, but then acknowledge the impacts to sidewalks and buildings. Next slide. And then, so for the Vision Zero analysis, what did we do? What did we look at? Go ahead, next slide. We found that there, in terms of collisions and patterns, in Vision Zero, where the staff is constantly looking for those patterns. Is there a pattern that we could make adjustments and fix? We didn't see a lot of patterns. There's many, many types of collisions. There's not the distinct patterns that you would see somewhere else, like on De La Vena. All modes are included. So no one's winning in this. It's pretty even across the board. Next slide. But safer crossings is something that we can do. So a couple different things. We can do the curb extensions throughout the entire corridor that cuts down the pedestrian crossing for Milpas. So on a side street where you have the green is actually held, not for the vehicle, but for the pedestrian, we can reduce those crossing distances and get Milpas running faster again, getting that green time back to Milpas. So that's really, really good. The arm, as you see to the left, for Yananali, so that on Yananali, there's no flashing beacon like at Ortega right in the middle of the street. They're only to the side, so some motorists are missing that. So getting that flashing beacon right in the middle of the street so that we get the yielding we need. Working on stronger visual cues for motorists at the roundabout. And then also 2 intersections off of Haley, Quarantina, and Nopal, having curb extensions there as well to create more visibility for crossing, particularly on the way to school over there. Next slide. And then for street lighting, in response to the community, we're doubling the street lighting at the intersection. So you see what it is in existing in the orange. Whenever you see orange street light, that's existing. The yellow street lights are the ones that we would propose adding with this, should we get the grant, to double the lighting at each intersection. Next slide. And so here comes the real conundrum, and this is the biggest part about the street. This is the compromise that we're having to wrestle with the couple things: the trees, the sidewalk, the parking lane, and the street. So as you can see, next to that tree, there's only about 3.5 feet between the building and the tree to get by, but the sidewalk's about 8. And then next slide. Here's another thing about Milpas. It's kind of interesting because the street is pretty narrow. That 7-foot bike parking lane is not really wide enough for cars to park and people to get out comfortably. Like I said, there's mirror swipes. And so people tend to avoid that lane that says 10 feet, that number 2 lane on Milpas. They feel more comfortable driving in the number 1 lane. So how would we address all 3 of these issues to get better parking, better driving, and get more use of that number 2 lane to increase the vehicle capacity on Milpas, and then also get more pedestrian space on the sidewalk? How will we do that? Well, let's go to the next slide and we'll show you how. So on the top of the screen is the existing situation, and I'm hoping that that's not too small for you. It is for me. I'm going to actually have to don some glasses. The sidewalk is 3.5. You see that, and you see the street tree right there, and then the parking lane at 7. That's the way it is today, and you see the center median and the 4 travel lanes. Now look to the bottom, and you see that the trees are moved into the parking lane. So this is how this would work. For the existing tree wells that we have, what this project would do, should we get this grant and you like this proposal, is that we would create curb extensions at the trees. And what that would provide is that over time, as we see the trees mature and need to be replaced, and they are replaced, the new tree would go further out into the parking lane, and then the sidewalk would be able to be a total of 7 feet. We do have about 5 trees that are diseased right now that would need to go, and then we have another 3 to 5 that are uprooting private property that we would also take out with the project and move the trees into the street immediately, still retaining most of the canopy. And then as the trees age and have to be replaced, the tree would be moved away and the sidewalk would be filled in. And as you can see in the lower picture, creating more space, 7 feet for pedestrians versus the 3.5 feet that they have today. The other thing that would happen is in this slide, which it's really hard to see and you're not really seeing it, is we would propose to move the parking lane closer to the sidewalk. So where it is right now, as the curb is 8 feet, we'd move it to 7, kind of further behind that tree. What that does is that gives the parking lane a little bit more breathing room, just a foot, so that there's less friction between the number 2 lane and parkers, easier to get out of your car, minimizing those mirror swipes and increasing the capacity of Milpas because more people will feel more comfortable driving in that number 2 lane. So this is the proposal that we're looking at. I do also want to show you another option that we can consider later. In talking with Parks and Recreation, the trees that we do replace are not going to have that big, ficus feel immediately. So that the community will feel that. There'll be another option. Why don't you go to the next slide that we could consider, and we wouldn't consider this as a part of the grant. Should we get the grant, we can have the discussion with the community later, but there is an opportunity to actually put in a center median. This would make even more breathing room for the sidewalk that we could get. And it would offer an opportunity, should the community want to have more plantings on State Street that are on Milpas. The downside of this is that this would limit turning movements into driveways, but it would still retain the left turn lanes at intersections. Next slide. This is what a parking section between trees looks like. So you can see that these pictures show that the trees are planted in the parking lane and then as opposed to the sidewalk. And that gives the sidewalk more room for pedestrians and pushes the tree away from the buildings. Again, this would happen over time, not all at once, and so that trees can have time to mature as other ones grow older and need to be replaced. Next slide. This is essentially what it would look like. This is a sample block. You can see the curb extensions. Another benefit that you're seeing here is that the driveways also have curb extensions. And what that means is the motorist that's pulling out of the driveway, you remember the public comment about having more visibility out of a driveway. This gives the driver a little bit more comfort because they're out in the roadway a little bit more before, so they can see oncoming traffic. And then it also shows the curb extensions at the intersections and the additional lighting, which is the yellow dots. And then trees that would be replaced in this block, and you can see the retention of the larger ficus canopy trees on this particular block. Next slide. The balancing act here is in order to increase the sidewalk widening, in order to widen the parking lane and get more driving capacity on Milpas in the number 2 lane, we do have to sacrifice some parking stalls because the trees would have to come out where there is parking now. So we did an extensive study of all the parking spaces, the on-street parking spaces on Milpas. There are an existing 160 parking spaces. And then we'd estimate a loss of 28 spaces to retain a total of about 130. So this is the compromise. And we did hear from the public that parking is important on the street. So it is a point of tension in terms of balancing the needs on Milpas, driving and parking and walking with the parking availability. But we think it's a good compromise. And if this should ever be built, Milpas will look much different than it is now. The narrowing of the canopy will also give the street, narrow the canopy from the sidewalk into the parking lane will also have the street feel a little bit nicer for both vehicles and pedestrians. Next slide. It's important to understand that there's part of the grant, which is on the right, the grant funding would go for the curb extensions, the curb realignments, the major sidewalk repairs, and the street lighting. But all the other, that should read, the third bullet should say possible median. All those would be on the side of the streets paving project, which is coming forward. So we would look to have our grant leverage the paving project that we're going to do anyway. Next slide. And we took this to the Transportation Circulation Committee for a good discussion. They found the project consistent with the city's Vision Zero strategy, the circulation element pedestrian master plan. Next slide, and this is what we're proposing that the council would approve, and I'd love to answer any questions you have, and Derek Bailey is still on the line.
Do any of my colleagues have questions? Ms. Gutierrez, go ahead.
First of all, thank you. Oh, can you hear me? Thank you so much, Mr. Dayton, for all this wonderful information. Everything that you have expressed on community feedback, you're right on point. Representing District 1 and actually walking those streets, I can tell you that all the feedback you gave is accurate. So thank you so much for doing that. I would like to see on a map where the potential street parking would be removed, just so the public can actually see, instead of us voting, yes, it's okay. But when it actually starts to happen, then you'll have community members like, what? We didn't know parking was going to be taken away. So if we can get a visual of where exactly those parking spaces are, would be great. Thank you so much for your team and all the hard work.
That is that's a really brilliant question, and it's really great because it has a very precise answer, because the answer is wherever you see an existing tree, that's where the parking would be removed, right in front of that tree. So the tree would come out into the parking lane, and that would be eventual. So if you see a ficus tree on the street, the parking would be removed right adjacent to that tree, and the curb extension would be out in the parking lane. And then if that tree is removed currently, it would be moved out right away. And then if it's a healthy tree, it would stay there for a certain period of time and then move after it's removed. So what's really great about your question is we know precisely where that is, and the public can see that. We actually have a map. If you want to back up on the slide, I think it's 4 slides. It shows exactly one, right, that one right there. You can see where the trees are. That's where the curb extension comes out, and then the parking would be removed right in front of those trees.
Ms. Gutierrez, you still have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification. And thank you so much for bringing up the issue about lighting, and how lighting is an issue, but that you guys will, look into maintaining the trees and the lighting. So my district really, really appreciates this. This is going to be so much great news. A lot of community members are going to be happy about this project. So thank you so much to you and your team.
And then I would just say, Madam Mayor, just to make sure I say it 7 times so you hear, is we haven't got the grant yet. We really want it. We're going to do a good job. We haven't got it yet. We think it's a very competitive project. If we do get it, we're looking at about 5 years out. So I know it's a slow pace, but we are very excited to be proposing this.
Questions from Ms. Sneddon next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Dayton. Just really quick, 2 questions. One, I just want to clarify. So that 3.5 foot width of the sidewalk, with this new plan, there'd be nowhere where it was 3.5 feet. It would be sort of smooth. So on average, what would be the street width? So some places it would be wider, but it would never go down to the 3.5. Is that correct?
That's correct. With the current plan, what we're shooting for is 7 feet consistent. Now, when I say that, remember, we don't get the full 7 feet until the tree is actually moved. So initially, what we'll see is about 5 locations, as many as 10. We'll see that we'll see that 7 feet immediately because the tree will be moved. And then over time, as the trees age and need to be moved, we'll get the 7 feet. I didn't say this before, but if we do the median section in addition, then we can get 8-foot sidewalks, because we're kind of pushing everything to the middle with that approach.
This is really great. Yeah.
That'll be an interesting discussion. We haven't told we didn't actually share that median approach in the public workshop whatsoever, and it's something that can be discussed with the community should we get the grant and we're in design 4 years from now.
Even just being above the 3.5 is significant for strollers, wheelchairs, dare I say shopping carts, for any rolling vehicle. And then just one more quick question, the street lights. So I'm really happy to hear you addressing the lighting issue. The street lights there are so high that it seems to create like an ambient light, but not light the sidewalk itself. And if you could speak to that, the design of that, and then if any of that's expected to change, shielded downward, or thoughts on that.
That's exactly right. The lighting is a little high, and when you have a pedestrian-oriented lighting like we find on Ortega or Anapamu in West Downtown, and like we're proposing on San Andreas on the west side, then it's a little bit warmer for the pedestrian and it's less likely to be blocked by a tree. So with the grant, we feel confident that we can get the lighting for the intersections. We're not as confident for the mid blocks, but that's something we can continue to look at as we pool the money and resources should we get the grant to, because that is important, that pedestrian level lighting in the mid block.
Okay, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Dayton, a couple quick questions for you. Is it just obvious, or did you actually say somewhere in there when you're talking about lane number 2 not being used, is there no way to reduce either side to just one lane of traffic and make improvements, including a bike lane?
Councilmember Jordan, there isn't a way to do that. In fact, the place that it does go down to one lane, which is if you're going north, that happens right beyond Haley, and then if you're going south, the one lane section ends at Coda, and there's bike lanes in that section. We've been experiencing some pretty heavy congestion in there, and so when we went to the community, we even said, hey, should we take out the bike lanes to gain more capacity? So we haven't been talking about going to one lane. Milpas is an extremely busy street. It serves a lot of the community, not just the east side. And it's my anticipation that as the freeway is widened and the freeway gets congested in town, Milpas is going to be one of the places where motorists get off to cut across town or do the last leg of their trip into town. So we want to be very sensitive to preserving the capacity of that street for motorists.
Okay. And then my impression too of Milpas is the sidewalk condition isn't just bad where there's trees. It's kind of a mishmash in bad condition everywhere. So would the grant be chasing that also, so that anywhere it's old concrete, new concrete, raised, whatever, lowered, just weird stuff, that would be addressed also?
Absolutely. We're looking at a new sidewalk with the grant.
And then the way you explain this is this will, I don't know how old a ficus tree gets, but the process of allowing a tree to age and getting to a point where you are willing to take it out and then do the infrastructure work on the ground, does a grant play into that where you get all the money, but you're really going to use it for 10 or 20 years?
That's a really great question, Councilmember Jordan. Yeah, we think that we'll be responsible. We're not going to be outright about that in the grant, but the city is obviously going to be responsible for paying for that little section once the tree is actually moved. We'll be responsible for doing that. So we feel pretty legitimate about saying that, we're going to cover that. It's not going to happen instantly. And then also I want to note that Director Zachary is also on the line. If you have any questions about trees specifically, she could answer them.
Do you have any, do you have any sense on those trees, what the timeline is to get to where they age appropriately and you can justify taking them out?
That would be a question for Ms. Zachary, do you think? Ms. Zachary, please.
Council members, Mayor Murillo, Councilmember Jordan, those trees, we would be looking at a number of different things related to the feasibility and when they would come out. Some of it has to do with age, and some of it has to do with their health. And sometimes the trees will present themselves as being ready to come out based on the fact that they're undergoing some sort of stress. Part of what we do along Milpas on a regular basis is assess each tree and determine whether we need to proactively take some out because we're concerned about their condition, and then also proactively trim them so that they are not hazardous for the neighborhood.
And that particular type of tree would not be the replacement tree, right?
No, Councilmember Jordan, Mayor Murillo, it would not. We would be implementing, working with Public Works, a similar process that we did on Upper State Street, where we developed a whole new series of designated street trees. And so when those trees are removed, we would have a specific species that would be planned to be placed. We would be looking at small, medium, and taller trees, so there'd also be a diversity in the treescape along Milpas.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ms. Zachary. Mr. Friedman, go ahead.
Thank you. To follow up on the trees. So one of the, just so I understand, is if we move the trees out farther, it creates more of a space for them to be able to grow. Am I understanding that correct? And then would there be a benefit then for the sidewalk that it would reduce impacts from tree roots uplifting the sidewalk? Would we expect any cases like that?
Absolutely, Councilmember Friedman, and you're right on it. You're nailing it. That's exactly what we want to do, because as you look at those slides, and Director Zachary talked about a tree being stressed. I mean, they look stressed out just sitting in that between that concrete. So yeah, we would have a much more generous room in the parking lane for those trees to expand their roots, and then obviously the pedestrians obviously get a generous space once they're moved. Yes. So
an ancillary benefit for the city would be a reduction in maintenance, and then for the pedestrians, less chance of trips and falls and those types of accidents. The other question I had, and I don't know if it's you, Mr. Dayton or Ms. Zachary, is as the trees are aging and we're bringing them out, is there any thought on moving a replacement tree for one of the existing trees up or down the block into, say, a more strategic location? So there would be perhaps you could open up a parking space in front of a business if there's a tree there, or would you just move it basically out, or would you be looking to move it up and down Milpas as it goes to, wanted to look at spacing out the canopy to make it nicer and get more shade coverage, and then also if there's a better place for parking?
That's a real possibility that we can work with Parks and Recreation and businesses specifically on. We'll have one shot at doing that. Should we get the grant again? Should we get the grant? We'll have one shot because there's the 5 trees that are diseased that will be coming out. There's also some trees that have already been cut down, so you just see a stump. And then the trees that will be removed because of property damage. Those trees don't necessarily have to be in those locations, so we can have that discussion at that time with the business owners and Parks and Rec to see where they would prefer to have them and where it would give more flexibility and not take away as much parking. We will have that flexibility.
Okay, that'd be great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions from our council? Ms. Clerk, are there people waiting to speak to this item?
Madam Mayor and council members, there are not any members of the public that have their hand raised for this item. So one last time, if you wish to speak on this item, item 4, please raise your hand. Madam Mayor, I'm not seeing anyone.
Thanks so much. I did get some emails and letters that came in supporting this item. So Anna Rico is supportive. She's representing Coast. Notes that it'll be good for children and families. Natalia Govani is a business owner and she's supporting us making the sidewalk safer. And Sebastian Aldana sent us an email and he's asking for electrical outlets at the base of the trees so that in the holiday season, people can wrap the trunk in lights. He also suggests taking out just ripping everything out, ripping out the trees. So maybe you can tell us, I mean, I'm assuming the healthy trees are beautiful. Maybe you don't want to rip them all out. I don't know. Maybe you can tell us about that. And then he suggests not using ficus trees because of their root structure. So I'll close public comment and let you respond to those couple of ideas, Mr. Dayton.
Yes, we really appreciated his contribution, as many people contributed to the process. A very robust discussion. That was the point of the community not really being on the same page, because we heard that comment. Take all the trees and start over. Take them out. Leave them all in. Don't do anything. So we really feel like this proposal is threading the needle of the community's concerns on both sides and allowing the transition. And then also, I understand from Parks and Recreation that the ficus tree will not be the tree that they're replacing. So that also speaks to that comment. It'll be a different tree. And I think Director Zachary alluded to that.
Very good. So we thank you, and we'll move to the part where we're looking at this recommendation. We do need a motion for this, and to go ahead and direct staff to go look for the money. Ms. Gutierrez.
I would like to forward with staff recommendation.
Ms.
I would
Harmon?
like to make a motion.
Are you going to second that, Ms. Harmon?
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion to this item? I don't see anybody. It looks like we're ready to vote. Ms. Gorman?
Yes, Madam Mayor and council members, for item 4, we have a motion by Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez, seconded by Councilmember Harmon for the staff recommendation.
But I see Mr. Jordan. You're just voting? Okay, so
Very
go ahead
prepared.
with the roll call vote.
Councilmember Jordan.
Aye.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Sneddon. I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Yes.
And Mayor Murillo.
Aye. Okay, that was unanimous. Ms. Clerk, and I will let staff know that we will be going to a break right now, and we have a special slide just for that. I don't think there's anything else. We're in recess. Thank you. we're ready to return to our meeting. Ms. Clerk, are you there? And are you ready to read item number 5 for us?
Madam Mayor and Council, item number 5 is public hearing for extension of the interim urgency ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara to declare existing law by amending Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.295.040P pertaining to the definition of hotels and similar uses. Recommendation the council adopt by reading in full and by a 4/5 vote an interim urgency ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara, extending ordinance number 5938, amending Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.295.040, subsection P, for an additional 10 months and 15 days or until March 3rd, 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Gorman. Mr. Kalan, are you ready to present?
I am. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you hear me? Thank you. Madam Mayor, members of the council, you'll recall that on March 3rd, we asked the council and the council responded with a unanimous vote to declare existing law and maintain the status quo by clarifying the definition of hotel contained in the inland portion of your zoning ordinance. The reason for doing that was litigation that threatened and continues to threaten our ability to carry out the council's policy of precluding short-term vacation rentals in most low-density residential zones. The next slide, please, Matt. So as we explained in March, the council's policy since 1983 has been to prohibit short-term rentals in low-density residential zones. We have multiple lawsuits pending that are attempting to punch holes in the council's policy. And we believe that situation creates an immediate threat to health, safety, and welfare that can be properly addressed and lawfully addressed through an interim urgency ordinance. The ordinance before you today extends your March 3rd ordinance for 10 months and 15 days until the same date in 2021. You should know, council should know, however, that the Planning Commission will be hearing the permanent ordinance this Thursday, and we expect to be back to the council sometime during the summer, September at the latest, with the permanent ordinance. With that introduction, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalan. I would ask our city council members if they have any questions for our city attorney related to this interim urgency ordinance. Your report was thorough. We've looked at the resolution. Go ahead, Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just really quickly, how often do we extend this and until what point? So when would it come up again for extension, or is that unknown?
No, it is known. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. The law would allow this to be extended for a total of 2 years. So the next extension, if necessary, and we really don't expect that, would come sometime in early 2021.
But from reading the council agenda report, it looks like you were targeting September 2020 as a date of having some materials ready.
Madam Mayor, that's a very conservative estimate. As I mentioned, Thursday, the Planning Commission will be making a recommendation to you, and we'll be back to you as soon after that as we can.
If there are no other questions from the council, I'm assuming there may be some public comment. I don't see any council members stepping forward. So Ms. Clerk, are there folks that would like to speak to this? Oh, okay.
And Madam Mayor, if I may just ask, there are 2 people that have called in. If either of you wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand. And we only have 1 person left who had spoken public comment, so I suspect he is not for this item.
Thank you, Ms. Clerk. In that case, we could have discussion or a motion. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd be happy to move staff recommendation to extend the ordinance, amending the municipal code.
Go ahead, Ms. Harmon.
I'll second that.
Thanks. Mr. Friedman, discussion to the motion, or you were looking to second? Okay, you were a third. Okay, if there's no other discussion, we'll take a roll call vote. Ms. Clerk, thanks.
Madam Mayor and Council, I am sorry to say that I do believe I need to read this entire ordinance into the record. So, is that correct, Mr. City
Okay.
Attorney?
Is that what you were going to tell us, Mr. Kalan? Oh, okay. Okay,
Yes,
so
Madam
we can all get comfortable because you're going to
Settle
read the
in.
whole thing. Thank you.
An interim urgency ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara extending ordinance number 5938, amending Santa Barbara Municipal Code section 30.295.040 subsection P for an additional 10 months and 15 days or until March 3rd, 2021. The City Council of the City of Santa Barbara does ordain as follows. Section 1, findings and determinations. A, on March 3rd, 2020, the City Council determined that there was an immediate need to protect the public health, safety, and welfare by making a declaration of existing law to preserve the status quo prohibition of short-term rental use, except in zones designated for hotels, by amending Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.295.040, subsection P, part of the city's zoning ordinance. B, an interim urgency ordinance authorized pursuant to Government Code Section 65858 and City Charter Section 511 and identified as ordinance number 5938 was therefore adopted on March 3rd, 2020 by unanimous vote of the City Council members who were present. The purpose of ordinance number 5938 is to amend the definition of hotels and similar uses contained in Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.295.040 subsection P for inland areas in order to avoid any uncertainty about the existing prohibition of hotels to include short-term rentals or other similar uses of single or multi-unit residential dwellings within lower density residential neighborhoods. In addition, ordinance number 5938 declares that the interpretation of the definition of and restriction on the location of hotels under Title 28, which previously applied citywide, but now which applies only in the coastal zone, and the interpretation of the definition of and the restriction on location of hotels under Title 30, which now applies inland of the coastal zone, are intended to be and shall be read to be consistent with each other. Ordinance number 5938, however, is due to expire on April 17, 2020, unless it is extended for up to an additional 10 months and 15 days or until March 3rd, 2021, by a 4/5 vote of the City Council as authorized under Government Code Section 65858. C, the City Council finds and determines that, based upon the foregoing, there remains a current and immediate need to protect the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires that ordinance number 5938, incorporated by reference, be extended for an additional 10 months and 15 days as authorized under Government Code Section 65858 to allow the city to initiate proceedings to adopt a permanent amendment to Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.295.040, subsection P, consistent with this urgency ordinance, that the ordinance must take effect immediately upon adoption, and that the urgency continues and is hereby declared. D, the city has undertaken and will continue to undertake proceedings to adopt a permanent amendment to Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.295.040, subsection P, during this additional 10-month and 15-day time extension period. E, the City Council has held a duly noticed public hearing in connection with consideration and adoption of this ordinance. F, the City Council now desires to adopt this ordinance extending ordinance number 5938 as an urgency ordinance effective immediately, and thereby ensure that a reasonable amount of time is provided to the city to conduct proceedings to adopt a permanent amendment to Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.295.040, subsection P, pursuant to the authorities set forth in Government Code Section 65858. G, the City Council finds that this ordinance should be read in full and adopted on an urgency basis pursuant to the authority in City Charter Section 511. Section 2, interim zoning adopted. A, the findings and determinations in Section 1 are true and correct. B, in accordance with the authority granted to the City Council under Government Code Section 65858 and City Charter Section 511, upon the effective date of this ordinance, ordinance number 5938 is hereby extended and incorporated herein by this reference for a period of 10 months and 15 days or until March 3rd, 2021. Other than those specific findings previously adopted in ordinance number 5938, all other portions of the city's zoning ordinance not referenced in ordinance number 5938 remain in effect. C, the City Council hereby declares that should any section, paragraph, sentence, phrase, or term of this ordinance hereby adopted be declared for any reason to be invalid, it is the intent of the City Council that would have adopted all other portions of this ordinance, irrespective of any other portion declared invalid. D, the ordinance shall take effect immediately upon passage by a 4/5 vote of the City Council in accordance with Government Code Section 65858. E, the council finds that this ordinance shall be read in full and adopted on an urgency basis pursuant to the authority and city charter, Section 511. And F, in addition, the City Council finds on the basis of the whole record and exercising its independent judgment, this ordinance is not subject to environmental review pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act, sections 15060C2 and 150C3, pertaining to activities that will not result in a direct or reasonably foreseeable indirect change to the environment and are not defined as a project under section 15378. This ordinance has no potential for resulting in physical change to the environment directly or indirectly, in that it merely clarifies existing law. And that's it.
Thanks so much, Ms. Gorman. We're ready to take a vote unless a city council member has a question or a comment now that we read through the ordinance. I don't see any, so Ms. Clerk, go ahead and do your thing.
Okay, this is on item number 6, a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, seconded by Council Member Harmon for the recommended action. Council Member Sneddon.
Yes.
Council Member Friedman.
Yes.
Council Member Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Yes.
And Mayor Murillo.
Aye. Okay, that was unanimous, it seems like. Thanks so much, Mr. Kalan. Thank you for your work on that item. We'll close that item and we'll go to the next one, item number 6, which is our coronavirus update. And are we going to the chief or to you first, Mr. Chief?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I will introduce the item and then introduce Chief Nickel. Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. This is the standard coronavirus update that we want to have on our agendas going forward. Today, I've invited Fire Chief Eric Nickel to speak about some of the emergency response planning and preparedness that's been going on through his office and his department. I will then have Laura Doubles speak about the homeless issue and the way we're addressing that and some of the changes that have occurred since we spoke about that last week. And then I thought we would wrap it up with Mark Aguilar from the planning department, who's been working closely with the city attorney's office on responding to questions about essential businesses and others, and give you a little status on that and inform people about how to address concerns to that work team. As you know, we continue as a city to manage the situation. We are doing so. The tone has changed in the last couple days, both at the state and federal level, to start talking about and planning for a very gradual reopening. My observation of that is not to get too excited, because unfortunately, I think we're still talking weeks away, but it is a glimmer of hope that we're starting to move forward as opposed to hunkering down. But I think we all have work to do as a community to continue to maintain the social distancing, the washing our hands, the wearing the masks in public, and the other actions that we are taking that is proving effective at trying to limit the spread of the coronavirus. And so I just want to assure people that we internally as well are starting to look at our operations, and based upon what orders come, how we start lifting some of the restrictions and steps that we have taken as well. So we're just now starting that. I don't have much to report on that today, but I want to let you know that that's our mindset, is to start preparing for that as well. Just to clarify how reopening would occur, the first step would need to be at the state level, because we are currently under the governor's order statewide for a stay-in-place order. and only go out for essential activities and necessities like that. So the first domino that needs to happen is guidance from the state in modifying that order. And as he had his press conference today, they're starting to think about that at the state. But again, I think it's still a little ways away. Then the question would be, what kind of orders, if any, would there be from the county coming down for the county of Santa Barbara? And then after that, it would be our decision as the city as to what we'd want to do. Don't know exactly how that's all going to roll out. Don't know what the incremental steps that are going to be. So we have to continue to look and monitor that. My reading of the situation is that we'll know more in a couple weeks about how we'll start doing that. I do want to temper people that I do think it's going to be a gradual lifting of restrictions. It's not going to be, yay, it's over, let's go back to how we were. I think this is still going to be a challenge until the testing gets better, until eventually a vaccine comes in place, that we're going to have restrictions and have to manage this the best way possible. Next week, I just want to give you a heads up, we will be releasing our draft budget, and we will be talking about the financial impacts that we're feeling and how we're going to have to modify that budget. So that will be next week. We'll also talk about economic development next week in relation to the budget. We'll have Dr. Peter Rupert come from the UCSB Economic Forecast and give his insights on the economic impacts. And then we'll talk about our economic development planning as well with our new economic development manager, Jason Harris, and Nina Johnson, talking about our efforts to immediately start focusing on the business recovery aspect, which is going to be a significant challenge for all of us as well. So with that, I will turn it over to our three speakers, and the first one will be Fire Chief Eric Nickel.
Hi, Chief. Thanks so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. Eric Nickel, your eager fire chief. Sorry, Paul, for jumping in a little too quick there. I wanted to give you an update from the public safety perspective. I'm also speaking on behalf of Police Chief Lori Luno as well. And I particularly want to start off with the first one. Had we not been in social distancing, we would be in front of you at the very beginning of our council meeting today, recognizing our amazing and talented and committed 911 dispatchers. This is National Telecommunications Week. We also call it Dispatcher Week. Like I said, we would have preferred to be in front of you. You know, these committed professionals are the first to interact with our community in times of emergency. You know, they calmly handle tens of thousands of calls for service every year, and the dispatchers are really our key link between the fire crews, the police crews, and our community members. The center has never closed, continues to provide excellent service, albeit under some new COVID rules. We can't even get in to see the dispatchers to try to keep them all safe and not having an exposure with any of our dispatchers. They have worked amazingly in the last few weeks as we've changed some of our dispatch protocols, and we've changed how we question our 911 callers to really try to identify potential COVID-19 calls for service. That leads me to the second item, which is kind of a more detailed COVID report, particularly with the public safety folks, just around exposure control and some personnel updates. You know, you were aware last week that one of our police officers did test positive for COVID. That officer is still remaining at home and recuperating. We did have a couple of fire personnel that went through testing. All three of those came back negative. And they, after recuperating, have all returned to duty. We currently don't have any staffing challenges within the fire and police departments. And we're continuing to practice, you know, really some best practice personnel monitoring, how we self-evaluate our personnel during the shifts to make sure that they haven't been exposed to anything, or if they're starting to feel ill, we'll send them home. We've modified a lot of our operational policies to limit the number of exposures, and we do extensive cleaning of our vehicles and our facilities. The next time I want to share with you is kind of a bigger within the county, within the Fire Chiefs Association Incident Management Team update. As you're aware, the Fire Chiefs Association has had a Type 3 incident management team in place for a number of years. They've been instrumental in managing some of the large wildland fires, the debris flow, and really the talents of these incident management teams we sort of bring a process and calmness to chaos. So we stood up the team very early in March, and the team was originally in a support role for both county public health as well as the county's emergency management operation. Last week, or earlier this week, last week, we entered into what's called a unified command. So essentially we function as one big comprehensive team, and that unified command is through the county executive's office as well as county public health. We make decisions as one unit. Each group brings their specialty to that team, and the specialty of the incident management team is really around putting plans together and managing and handling logistics, two really key things, particularly as we talk about our public or our PPE, our personal protective equipment. We've been able to centralize and unify planning and logistics activities. We gather as one team the COVID information, and we improve our collective response for every city as well as the unincorporated county areas within the county. We work as one interagency organization. We still do face some challenges around shortages of some of this personal protective equipment. I mean, that's universal. You've seen this story nationwide. But I contrast our one-point ordering and how we're working as one team with my previous assignment up north, where each agency is trying to compete against other agencies and their neighbors for shortages of some of this equipment, whereas we have come together and said, who really needs some equipment today? And we make sure that who really needs equipment today gets it. And so we're working and cooperating, and it's really quite exciting to see. The last thing I want to leave you with is a bit of good news. I'll close my report with a good news story. As Mr. Rogers famously said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would always say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And, a lot of people look to the folks with the badges and uniform on as the helpers. And we certainly are proud to play that role, honored to play that role. But in times like this, we have some helpers that are helping the first responders. If you're familiar with World Central Kitchen and Spanish celebrity chef Jose Andres, he started this nonprofit called World Central Kitchen. And typically they have gone into these areas that have been impacted by natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, and oftentimes are the first governmental or non-governmental agency getting into these areas and providing hot food within 12 to 24 hours. And so they've been very active nationally, internationally since the COVID-19 was starting to spread across the world. They've pivoted in the last few weeks, and they're now supporting first responders. So it's kind of a cool thing. The donations are there to support local kitchens and chefs that are basically closed down and not making any money. They enter into contract with some of these local restaurants and chefs and say, we want you to produce X number of hot meals for our first responders for the next 4 weeks and pay them out of World Central Kitchen. So we started yesterday receiving our first hot meals. They've been delivered to fire, police, hospital, EMTs, paramedics within the county. And it's my understanding that they've got a 4-week contract with them. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the helpers that are helping the helpers. It's pretty special. Our family has supported that nonprofit for a number of years, and it's sort of humbling to now being we're a recipient of some of their work. So I just wanted to let you know that this is going on, and it's bigger than Santa Barbara, and it is neat to have that bigger connection, but also with the local impact of employing some of our out-of-work chefs and restaurants. So those are the things I want to share with you. That's the end of my report. I'm available if you have any questions.
Are there questions for Chief Nickel from our council? We'll go to the next speaker, and if you'll be hanging around, maybe there'll be questions for you, Chief. Mr. Casey, who's next? Oh, Ms. Doubles. Welcome, Ms. Doubles.
Hello. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Laura Doubles. I'm the Housing and Human Services Manager for the city. I'd like to thank you for having me back here today to give you an update on our homeless neighbors. I wanted to share some news that has happened since last week when I was here presenting an update. The city actually, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, we have placed 8 ADA accessible portable restrooms throughout the city that are accessible 24/7 to our homeless population. And those were placed last Friday on April 10th. And I'd like to kind of go over why the city has taken this action. And we'll start with the first screen here, the slide. Okay. So the state CDC, or Centers for Disease Control, they actually released guidance on encampments for homeless people on March 22nd, 2020. And what was in there was a whole section on prevention measures that we should be taking for encampments. And I'm just going to go ahead and read these because I think these are very important. It's taken straight from the guidance. So it does actually tell us why we are taking the actions that we did. So unless individual housing units are available, which at this present time they are not here in City Santa Barbara, we're not to clear the encampments during this community spread of COVID-19. Clearing these encampments can cause people to disperse throughout the community and break connections with service providers. This increases the potential for infectious disease spread. So, and we are supposed to encourage people that are staying in encampments to set up their tents and their sleeping quarters with at least 12 by 12 feet of space per individual. Now, note that that is an encourage. We can't enforce that, but we do have our providers that are going out there currently with case managers, food delivery that is all encouraging our homeless population with these guidances. Next slide, please. We're also to ensure nearby restroom facilities that have functional water taps are stocked with hand hygiene materials, soap drying materials, and bath tissue, and remain open to people experiencing homelessness 24 hours per day. Because our encampments are not nearby these restroom facilities, it also states if toilets or hand washing facilities are not available nearby, to provide access to portable latrines with hand washing facilities for encampments of more than 10 people. And that is why that the city has actually placed 8 of these portable latrines out there throughout the city. Next slide, please. These are the locations of the 8 that we have placed out there in the city. I'll just briefly show that listing. You can look at the listing here, and then we'll go on to the next slide. And so that gives you some information as to why these portable restrooms are out there, if you've seen them. We are having the county actually move some of our hand washing stations that they were able to rent when they were available to some of these locations. They're currently working on that as well. Right now, all of the vendors that we have contacted about hand washing stations are currently out. As you can imagine, that's been a big ask. And so we are waiting to see when they are going to have more stations available. But in the meantime, we're working with the county on getting those that they have possibly moved over to these areas. So as far as the county, there's been a lot of questions that I've received about, well, when are we going to get an emergency congregate shelter? And the news on that is that the county and the state is now focusing more on providing non-congregate units for homeless instead of an emergency congregate type setting. And so what that means is they are more looking at securing motel and hotel rooms to be able to put people in. And especially they are focusing now on these three categories that I have on the screen. So the first priority, and these are listed in priority, they will look to people who are aged 65 years or over with serious health condition that makes them vulnerable to catching the virus. The second group of priority would be if they have a serious health condition that makes them vulnerable to catching the virus. And the third group is for all individuals aged 65 and over. So right now, the county is in the final stages of an agreement with a motel or hotel here in Santa Barbara. They don't divulge the address, so we don't know that, but it is for 68 rooms. So those should be coming online shortly. Right now, we have basically, we're about 3 weeks behind Ventura County. They actually have some that are already in being used. And so we're kind of gaining our best practices from them. So in these units, all occupants, they will be non-COVID-19 individuals. So they are not positive tested for this COVID virus. And they will be put into these in the priority listed above, the three categories that I just named. These people that are going to be in this shelter are going to be screened by public health as far as the health conditions, if they have health conditions, to make sure that our priority individuals are getting into these rooms to provide safety for the risk that they have. The guidance that they will have there at that area would be that they are to shelter in place. So there's not going to be a lot of movement in and out of these units. They are going to make it so that there is basically one way in and one way out, and there will be sign-ins. They're going to be providing 24/7 in security and the support services that these people need as well. Next slide, please. So that is an update on what the county is doing right now. And then they did still say that they need a lot of volunteers and donations are still needed. So the info for that, as you can see on the screen, is can be found at the Santa Barbara County's Housing and Community Development webpage under Homeless Assistance and COVID-19 Resources. The link is listed there. And there's also a lot of good information on the Santa Barbara County Public Health webpage as well. I've also listed the link there as well. You can also, if you are interested in volunteering and you don't have access or don't like to do this online, you can also sign up basically over the phone with them. The number is here on the screen, 805-564-5780. And that they have manned that line from Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So that is my presentation. If you have any further questions, I'm here and available.
Mr. Friedman, you have a question for Ms. Doubles?
Thank you, Ms. Doubles. Appreciate the update and am pleased to hear that we have some hotel rooms coming online with the security for those individuals to be able to shelter individually. And you mentioned that there was support services. What types of services are those that the hotel is providing, or are they other types of wraparound like mental health, other services that our providers would be able to access there?
Right, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Friedman, those are actually going to be provided by actual service providers such as BeWell, people that actually do delivery of those services on a normal, regular basis. The county will be actually using those providers to come on site and to provide those services.
And so this could then be a means as we transition out long-term to actually connect those who might have been service resistant into services, if I'm understanding this correct?
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Friedman, yes, that is something that is very possible, especially if we were to be able to figure out or secure some more units, or possibly even, like I said in my briefing last week, that the state is looking at even doing some kind of leasing, of the property, or possibly even purchasing or acquiring the property later. I have no idea if that's what is in this agreement with Santa Barbara's. That would be something that the county is actually working out with them. But if they are definitely looking into more of a future solution as well.
I do want to transition here to the Cacique Street bridge crossing. So I drove by it last night around 7 o'clock, and just to see what the status was and what the impacts were there. And you and I had discussed this virtually, I guess. And my observations were that there wasn't the ability to meet the guidelines of the 12 by 12. In addition, there were other impacts there. And for the community, when I looked at it, I drove under and then drove back, that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for the residents of the east side to actually walk on either sidewalk on each side. So I don't think that is an appropriate location now, considering the constraints of the sidewalk, the need for the community to be able to access some of the parks on the other side, maybe even the beaches by walking. And so I wanted to ask if there is any discussions, or if you'd be able to work with some of our service providers to find a new location for that specific site, because it is a major arterial, especially for pedestrians to get through there. And I'm just concerned about a lot of issues that have sprung up there. And again, I went to take a look myself and have seen what we've received some emails on it, and agree with some of the sentiments that have been there in terms of the impacts to the residents of the east side. So could you speak to that? And I have ideas on where it can go, but I'm sure that you've all looked at them, so I would leave it to you. But can you explain or give some light on what we might be able to do to move it? Thank you.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Friedman, absolutely. I thank you for that feedback. It is good to know, and we definitely are flexible. What we actually put into place was SB Act, our collaborative partner, got about 12 different actual service and outreach providers together. They meet on a regular basis twice a week, but I actually tasked them with this to try to tell us or come up with the sites, knowing that they were the ones that serve mostly the homeless populations, and they would have more of an idea of the areas that would be best to put these in, according to also the state CDC guidance. So they did come up with these sites that we placed them in, but I can certainly have them convene again and maybe look that over and see if they can provide us some alternate sites for those. Definitely.
I appreciate that, and that site in particular. So appreciate you looking into that.
Sure.
Mr. Kalan, you have something to add?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Last April, when we discussed street behavior issues in general, we also discussed potentially extending the city's sit-lie ordinance to address the issue that Council Member Friedman just raised. So that's an option that is out there, but which we have not chosen to pursue as yet.
Well, to this point, Ms. Doubles, I was remembering that whenever it rains, virus or no, people take shelter under there. So I'll be in conversations with Mr. Casey and SB Act and yourself and the county about finding a longer term solution to people gathering under there. But we had rain and we had virus concerns at the same time. So I really do feel for the East Siders. And I've been driving through there too. So any other questions for Ms. Doubles? Okay, well, thanks so much. And I know you work hand in hand with county public health and all of our partners at the county, trying to help our neighbors who live on the street. So thanks so much, Ms.
Thank you,
Doubles.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council.
And we'll go to Mark Aguilar. Are you ready? You're ready. Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. Mark Aguilar, business liaison with the city. I just have a few slides to update you on how we are responding to inquiries and complaints about businesses and non-essential businesses, specifically that are still operating in defiance of the governor's order. The order allows certain essential businesses to remain open, and those are the businesses that would operate critical infrastructure. And then there's a distinction from the non-essential businesses that must remain closed. And so we are, the city's responding to these on a case-by-case basis. Next slide. So what we've established is an email address, landuse@santabarbaraca.gov. That's been set up so that we can receive inquiries and complaints through a single channel. And that's specifically just for us to assess concerns about non-essential businesses that are operating. By having just the single channel and not additional phone numbers, it allows multiple staff to access that email address, and those staff can respond. And if some staff aren't here, then other staff can step in. People are concerned about anonymity. They don't want others to know that they had some concerns. That's certainly allowable. To date, over the past 3 weeks, we've had roughly 90 inquiries, probably closer to 100 after today, and they vary. They range from all types of personal service type businesses to residential work, to construction work, and that's the whole gamut. Everybody's still learning what's allowed and what is not allowed, and we're happy to educate folks. Next slide. So the way we follow up with these inquiries and complaints is I've teamed up with the city attorney's office, or perhaps they've teamed up with me. We work together to identify and the information that's come in. We kind of rank it, prioritize it. We have staff that go out in the field to follow up on businesses that may be open, and we try and inform them and educate them. That's our first step. We just like to encourage compliance. If folks do not want to comply after a certain number of contacts, and that kind of can vary a bit, we will refer them to the district attorney's office. Next slide. So there's countywide coordination. There are twice weekly meetings amongst representatives from the unincorporated areas of the county as well as the municipalities. We're trying to approach this consistently, but allowing a little amount of flexibility for the various jurisdictions. We have at the Business Liaison webpage links to the governor's and the county public health officer's orders. So those are available for the public to access. Again, if you have inquiries or concerns or complaints about non-essential businesses, please email landuse, LANDUSE at santabarbaraca.gov. I think that's all I have. I have one more slide. The Santa Barbara County Public Health Officer orders also clarify some of the orders from the governor. They're a little more restrictive. Generally, we found broad compliance amongst the community to those, but not everyone. And we've made contact with a number of businesses and we're following up with them. I'm available for questions. Thank you, Council.
Go ahead, Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Mr. Aguilar, just specifically questions about enforcement we've had several emails about patio dining. Is patio dining allowed as the takeout order? And then also, other than enforcement, what other things is your office doing or other resources where we can look for other types of help?
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, so no, for food businesses, they are not allowed to have dining and outdoor patios. All your seating areas are supposed to be blocked off and inaccessible. As far as what we're also doing is we've been coordinating with, again, the City Attorney's Office and the Office of Emergency Services to develop informational flyers in both English and Spanish that we can pass out to folks. That's something that has come up on the topic of sidewalk vendors. We are viewing them, since they are allowed by state law, we're viewing them as food operators. So we're trying to treat them with the same requirements that we would for anyone else, which is to wear a mask and to employ social distancing for their customers. Yeah, I think that's what I got.
Any other questions for Mr. Aguilar, please? I'll ask you, how many emails do you get per day? Or was there a big rush right at the beginning when people didn't realize they were non-essential? Or
Madam Mayor, council members, it's probably kept a pretty reasonable flow coming in. We did just receive today a chunk of complaints that had initially gone to county staff. And so they collected those through their format and then sent that lump over to us today. So I think I've already emailed the City Attorney's Office to follow up on a few of those.
And I think it's true vice versa, right? We get complaints related to businesses that are outside of our jurisdiction and we let other people know.
Madam Mayor, that's correct. Early on, we were getting some unincorporated county and City of Goleta inquiries. Now that we have a roster of contacts amongst the various jurisdictions, we can now just forward back and forth.
Thank you, Mr. Aguilar. I don't see any other questions for you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay. And what is next on our agenda? That Mr. Casey?
Madam Mayor, that wraps up our presentations on this. Happy to answer any of the questions. Otherwise, we can move forward.
Mr. Casey, I did. I'm sorry. What was the last thing you heard me say? Nobody was listening. I'm teasing. That there's 29 new positive cases identified today by the County of Santa Barbara, and they're actually live right now in one of their 4:30 press conferences. So I understand if some of you are going to go to that venue, and the county public health department is the authority and the lead agency in this. And so we work very closely with them. Just wanted to let you know that there's 29 new cases. Only 3 of them are the city of Santa Barbara. And we really feel for the people who are incarcerated in the Lompoc Penitentiary. That's where most of the new cases seem to be blossoming. So, Mr. Casey, anything to that, or should we go to Mr. Jordan for a question? Mr. Jordan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see Chief Luneau's on the list. I was wondering if I could ask a couple questions there.
Chief Luneau, are you here? There she is.
Yes, I am.
Go ahead,
Afternoon.
Mr. Luneau.
So, you know, we've been exchanging emails on pop-up problems that are occurring in probably sections of town that might be problematic now and then, but they also happen to border or actually in neighborhoods, and what the at least the problem caller is having trouble with police responses. And I was just wondering if you could talk briefly about how we're prioritizing what we can expect and what the reasons for that are.
Madam Mayor, City Council, yes, we are transitioning through, I think, finding a way to do this safely for all of us. We are always responding to emergency calls and in progress calls. So we've had some calls we're working through and we're readdressing in regards to getting calls of groupings and how we can safely address that. So I want to say definitely emergency calls in progress we are responding to, but what we're trying to do is make sure we're doing it smartly and safely so that we don't get exposed as well as expose our community. So it's a balancing act, and there are certain situations that are frustrating for us to not be able to manage right now. And with those, we're asking for people to be patient and work with us. I have a planned, that was my cat in the background. I apologize.
We were laughing at that.
Everybody wants to be on TV. But I do have a planned email meeting request with our city attorney's office to talk about some more ability to do some efforts in some of our problem areas. I know that's not a straight answer, but
so I get what, in the sense of the email, I mean, I get, you know, the one particular one I'm talking about. I get the sense of their distress, but part of it, I think, too, is from my perspective, is a message that this is not a time for people to be going out and policing their neighborhood to things that they see that are not immediate threats to body or property. Would that be a correct message?
Absolutely. The stay away order really means we want people safely tucked in at home, and some things they may not like seeing around them, but it's best not to address them and create confrontation. We're always going to be there to help, but I think the best rule is to avoid those, and really, when it comes down to it, value yourself over property. We will respond, we'll address criminal acts. We're not requesting our community to do that for us.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I suppose this may be a question for Chief Leno about just petty theft, window smashing, that kind of thing. We're hearing an uptick in some of that activity. Is that accurate? And what might people do to prevent that? And then the other question I had is, how did we do this weekend with our parks and beaches and trails? And maybe that's a question for Mr. Casey, I'm not sure. But just that I think all saw on KEYT reporting of extra windows being smashed and sort of petty theft with car windows and that kind of thing. If you could speak to that.
Madam Mayor and Council Member Sneddon. Yes, we're seeing a little uptick in crime in a way that we definitely don't enjoy seeing. We are getting crime reported differently now through the internet and some reports over the phone, so they're probably not as immediately available as we're used to, but I plan on compiling a pretty comprehensive list that clarifies the change that we've seen. So a lot of the petty crime or lower level vandalism are associated with maybe some children or youth that are not engaged and out in the streets, and then some of it too with some criminal element that is looking for means to survive, I hate to say. So another area that really concerns us is the uptick in violence, and that is across the board in regards to reasoning. It's, we have a lot of people on the streets that were in custody the last couple months. So I think our law-abiding citizens understand they need to be inside, and they are continuing to be law-abiding citizens for the most part.
Thank you.
And Madam Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, with regards to our parks and beaches, it's something we monitored very closely over the weekend. We had our park rangers out, we had extra patrols in the harbor patrol, we had police kind of monitoring as well. It's still a tough one where we continue to monitor it. For the most part, I think people are doing well on practicing the social distancing. There's a few parts in town that are getting used pretty well, and I would encourage people not to use them. Let's all do this together so we can keep those open spaces open. But Henry's Beach in particular is the one spot that we hear more than anything that, boy, it's crowded. People are kind of spaced out and good, but just a lot of people in the general area. And so just encourage people, if it looks busy, don't go. walk your neighborhood, find something much quieter place to go rather than our busy popular spots that we want to enjoy. Saturday was a beautiful day. And so I think Saturday we saw more people out, and then Sunday with it being kind of drizzly, we didn't see nearly as much. So just really ask the community to help us out, that if we all want to try to keep some open space for us to get out and get some fresh air, let's be really good and use common sense about it. And if it's busy, go somewhere else.
Thank you. And then just since you mentioned Hendry's Beach, could you clarify for us whether that's a city beach or county beach, or which beaches are within the city's jurisdiction?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. It is a question we get a lot, and it's interesting. So Henry's Beach, at the bottom of Las Positas Valley, it is within the city limits, but it is a county park. The county owns the property where the parking lot is and the concession. So the county manages the parking lot in the area. When you walk to the beach, if you walk to the left, it's a city beach. And that's the dog beach, where the city has allowed dogs off leash on the beach. And if you walk to the right, it's a county beach. So it's a little bit of a collaborative effort there, but the county maintains the parking lot and the concession there with the restaurant.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Sneddon. And, you know, for people who want their dog off leash, our Mackenzie Park is still open. Mr. Casey, is that right? Our off leash park there. And then the county has several enclosed off leash dog parks in their system. So if you're going to Hendry's Beach, going to the beach and turning left to let your dog off, I know it's not the same thing being at the beach off leash, and but if that's a possibility too, if you need to let your dog run free, there's other options besides that particular beach. And I would add that when I go to the East Beach, there's parking along Cabrillo, and people are spaced out, and it's not overcrowded. That's what I saw. Mr. Jordan, to this topic, or whatever, if you have another question.
Not a question really, Madam Mayor. If I could just, I just wanted to make a comment, a couple minutes, if you'll bear with me. But, you know, the city runs really well in normal times, and it's not running really poorly now, despite the fact that we have extraordinary and significant challenges that are literally a once in two lifetime type of events. We're further constrained by state and county orders and guidelines, and we have a responsibility to keep the city functioning. We have a responsibility to protect our employees, and we have a responsibility to prioritize so that our employees can keep providing core services and first responder services no matter what. Running throughout that entire scenario is a staff, a set of managers, department heads, and executive team that are working literally around the clock, 7 days a week, to keep this going and keep it well. I just wanted to shout out that I'm extremely proud to be part of that dynamic. And I wanted to particularly mention both the city administrator and Mayor Murillo for how hard I know you're working, how hard this is on both of you to keep this pace up, to answer to every single question and concern and challenge. And I think the city will run well again, just as it has in the past, but we're working hard to get through this. And I couldn't be more proud to work with this group of people. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. I really appreciate that. Well, I don't see any other people stepping forward to speak. And Mr. Casey, thank you so much for the update. And my gratitude to Ms. Doubles and Mr. Aguilar, to our fire chief and our police chief, and everyone else who's responding to the COVID-19 outbreak here and in at the county. So we'll close that and move on to the next item, which is our committee assignments. And a lot of our activities have been curtailed, but Mr. Friedman, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended Visit Santa Barbara, had a webinar on current sentiments among the general public, some data throughout the country and locally on travel and kind of projecting forward going into later this year and next year, and kind of what to try to expect and to try to start planning for the future when the restrictions are out there and as we slowly reopen. That's all I went to this week. And then in light of quotes every week, I've decided to do a social distancing playlist to quote. So this is the one for this week. It's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Don't Come Around Here No More.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyone else have any activities to report on? I can report that Oscar Gutierrez and Alejandro Gutierrez and myself have been working on a project to engage teens who are out of school and they're being denied some recreational opportunities. And the program is called Youth Responder. And it's training young people to package and distribute food under the training and guidance of the food bank, so that they're actually serving their own communities, and they get community service hours for it and a small stipend. So we're trying to keep our young people busy at a difficult time for them. Their school activities are disrupted, everything's disrupted for these young folks. So we'll have more on that program going forward. So we'll close our committee assignment reports. And Ms. Clerk, we do have some closed session items.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we have item 7, conference with city attorney, existing litigation, Government Code Section 54956.9 D1 as described in agenda item 7. Item 8, conference with city attorney, anticipated litigation, Government Code Section 54956.9 D2 and E2/5 as described in agenda item 8. And item 9, conference with city attorney, anticipated litigation, Government Code Section 54956.9 D4, initiation of litigation on one matter as described in agenda item 9.
Thanks.
Madam,
Mr. Kalan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, we will not have a report out on these closed sessions. So if the council will adjourn this virtual meeting and move to the confidential virtual meeting that I have provided you elsewhere, we can begin the closed sessions. Thank you. I'm signing off.
Okay. We'll adjourn this meeting to closed session with good thoughts and best wishes to everyone surviving the pandemic. Thank you. Worldwide.